It is a high-stakes Super Tuesday as millions of Americans are making their voices heard. I'm Brianna Keeler here in Washington alongside Boris Sanchez on this big day. And right now, voters in 16 states and American Samoa are casting their ballots. They will decide if former President Trump, who enters the day with a big delegate lead over Nikki Haley, takes a giant leap toward the Republican presidential nomination.
And on the Democratic side, President Biden is also poised for a massive delegate haul today. Heading into November, though, polls show he is struggling with two key issues: immigration and the economy. CNN's Ed Lavandera is live for us at a polling location in El Paso, Texas. We also have with us CNN business and politics correspondent Vanessa Yurkevich. Ed, let's start with you. What are you hearing from voters on how the migrant issue is affecting how they cast their ballots?
Well, immigration top of mind, especially for Republican voters here in Texas. And we've heard that from voters here this morning who are casting ballots in the Republican primary. We're at one of the polling locations in El Paso, Texas, one of many border communities who have been affected by the ongoing immigration debate. But, you know, the Republican Party in Texas also finds itself in the midst of a civil war. And this election day will really kind of be an interesting test of the influence that Donald Trump has on Texas Republicans. He's been very involved in actually some lower level races here in Texas. He's been endorsing candidates for state house races and that sort of thing. So it is really interesting to see this tension that is going on between the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party and what would would have been the old Bush wing of the Republican Party. And both of those are really colliding, and there are many races down ballot from the presidential election that we're really going to see that here in the coming hours, and that is what many people here in Texas will be paying close attention to. And the other thing to pay close attention to, Boris, and as you mentioned, this immigration issue, especially down in the Rio Grande Valley and the Eagle Pass area, where that has been such an intense issue. Just how many Latino voters begin switching from Democrat to Republican. That is something that many political operatives paying very close attention to, and especially in this election cycle, to really kind of get a sense of how that immigration issue is going to affect these races, especially in the general election in November.
All right, Ed Lavandera, thank you so much.
Donald Trump can beat Joe Biden in November?
Yes.
Even with all of the troubles he has?
Even though
Joe Biden won in 2020?
Joe Biden has nothing to help the country, nothing. So, yes, I want Joe Biden out of the White House.
Do you think Donald Trump won the 2020 election, or do you think he lost it?
I think he won. We won. We lost due to trickery.
But you believe the 2020 election was stolen, just to be clear?
Yes. Big time.
Even after several years of evidence proving otherwise, you still don't believe that? Well,
nothing has been proven because everything is been a cover-up. So, yes, but I do believe that it was stolen.
So, Brianna and Boris, just, you kind of get a sense of just that intense grip that Donald Trump has on Republican voters here in the state. That was a voter that we spoke with just moments ago.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. Let's go to Vanessa Yurkevich, because the economy, Vanessa, I mean, not surprisingly, it's a top concern among voters. There are some strong economic indicators. The question is going to be if they're strong enough to counter some of the negative experiences that people are having when it comes to their day-to-day economic life.
Yeah, the economy is a top issue for voters. It's always has been a top issue for voters. But there has been some progress for people on the economy. And when we talk about the economy nowadays, we're really talking about prices, inflation. We have come a long way when inflation was sitting at 9.1% in June of 2022. Inflation in January has come down to about 3.1%. And also a way to kind of figure out how people are feeling is consumer sentiment. We saw that in the end of last year, beginning of this year, consumers were actually feeling pretty good about the economy. You can see that line ticking up in November. However, in February of this year, we saw consumer sentiment start to drop a little bit. And that is because inflation has kind of been stuck around 3%, above 3%. And you started to see consumers pulling back on spending and then starting to feel not as great about the economy. This is the hurdle for Joe Biden. Things go up and down. The numbers do not lie. But it's really hard to tell people that their feelings about the economy are not right.
Vanessa, some of that frustration with key barometers of the economy is being felt in different places. I want to show a tweet now from a voice I've often gone to get important perspective. A key American consumer of cookies, the Cookie Monster from Sesame Street, he tweeted, quote, "Me hate shrinkflation, me cookies are getting smaller." This, Vanessa, comes as President Biden is launching a strike force aimed at price gouging ahead of the State of the Union address. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, well, number one, do not mess with Cookie Monster and his cookies, that's for sure. But he's really expressing a lot of what Americans have been seeing, both with prices, but also for the amount of product that they've been getting. Corporations often will shrink the product to try to keep the prices down. But Americans are not fooled, and you see so many responses to Cookie Monster's tweet saying, thank you for calling this out. You see Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bob Casey calling on corporations to do better. They have a bill in place to tackle this. And just today, President Biden announcing this joint strike force between the DOJ and the FTC aimed at going after corporations that they believe are basically illegally causing prices to be higher for consumers. And so this is a way for President Biden to be able to put his stamp on the fact that he's trying to lower prices. President Biden doesn't have a lot of pull in terms of how to bring down prices, but this is a way that he can show Americans that he's trying to make prices more affordable for everyday Americans, guys.
Yeah, more cookies. Hard to argue with the politics of that. Vanessa Yurkevich, thank you so much. We are keeping a close eye on several other key races as well, including in the swing state of North Carolina.
That's right. CNN's Diane Gallagher is live outside of a polling place in the Charlotte suburb of Cornelius. Diane, what are you hearing from voters there about the race for president?
You know, we've talked before about this long down ballot after the presidential race. So there are a lot of people coming here for different reasons. But in terms of issues that are inspiring them to come out here, I have heard pretty much unanimously abortion, education, immigration, and talking about just what they see for the future of the state and the country. Now, I have spoken to people who have cast ballots for President Biden, former President Trump, and Ambassador Haley, all saying that they have their own reasons to do so. Now, in terms of votes for Nikki Haley, the majority of people who tell me they've cast their ballot for her did so because they were unaffiliated voters, registered unaffiliated. They can go in and choose whichever ballot they want to participate in, Republican, Democratic, Libertarian, and they did so and voted for Haley as a form of protest.
I just do not really agree with Trump's rhetoric and all of his, well, not all of his policies, but I just think that the Republicans deserve a better choice, and I think that's Nikki Haley.
Is Nikki Haley someone you feel like you could vote for in November?
No. I will vote Democrat in November.
Now, North Carolina has a very robust early voting and absentee voting period here. And so we're looking at about 695,000 votes that have already been cast before we started voting here on primary day. They anticipate a nice, healthy turnout as well. Polls close at 7:30 p.m. And again, a lot of races on the ballot for people here in this state to choose from.
All right, Diane Gallagher, thank you so much live for us from North Carolina. And on this Super Tuesday, former President Trump, he's on track to potentially win more primaries and caucuses than any previous Republican presidential candidate than an incumbent.
Yeah, here with us now to discuss, Republican strategist and partner at On Message Inc., Brad Todd. Also with us, CNN senior political commentator Ana Navarro. Ana, we'll go to you because it's not just Super Tuesday, it's also a 305 day. Shout out to all our Miami people out there.
I was very thankful that Pitbull told us this very early in the morning.
Yeah, he posted something on social media. It has to surprise you that we're here right now, given everything that happened on January 6th, given the 4 years of Donald Trump. He's poised to become the Republican nominee in very short order. Are you surprised?
I'm appalled. I guess I'm not that surprised because I live in Miami-Dade. And as you know, in Miami-Dade, there's a lot of those voters like Armando, who we heard interviewed by Ed Lavandera, who it turns out the Hispanics are conspiracy theorists too and believe in lies too. Look, it's appalling to me as somebody who grew up in the Republican Party that the law and order party is that Donald Trump, who's got 91 counts in at least 4 jurisdictions, who's been found liable of sexual assault to the tune of $83 million, who's been found liable of fraud to the tune of $500 million, is skating to the nomination. And so it's hurtful, it's shocking, it's appalling, but I'm also a realist, and I realized a long time ago that this was going to be a binary choice and that this is where we were going to end up. I'm glad Nikki Haley's still in the race. I think that anything that gets under Trump's skin, and she does, is good. I'm glad that people have an ability to issue, that her name being there gives them an ability to have a protest vote, but it's going to be Biden versus Trump.
Brad, what do you think, and what are you thinking about this moment in the race?
I think we need to look back a year ago. A year ago, Ron DeSantis was ahead of Donald Trump, 39-28, 11 points. For a former president of the United States, literally just barely above a quarter. Donald Trump ran against Ron DeSantis, he ran against Nikki Haley, he ran against Chris Christie. It's a fairly strong field, especially considering he's a former president. And I think you have to give the Trump campaign credit. This is the best campaign he's run, technically, of the three. And he had it started out with in an electorate where maybe only a third were eager for him to be the nominee again, and he's won over enough that he's going to probably get pretty close to the delegate lead tonight. And I don't think we're spending enough time saying that they've run a pretty good campaign, and I think you have to give them credit for that.
Certainly the most organized that we've seen from Trump world so far. Immigration, as we heard from Ed there, a key issue in this campaign. But I'm really curious to get your perspective on the rhetoric that Donald Trump has used. Let's play some of the sound from Donald Trump. I believe this is from Fox News earlier today.
Our borders are an embarrassment all over the world. We have millions and millions of people coming in from jails, from mental institutions. Nobody's ever seen it. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. They're coming in from jails and prisons and mental institutions, insane asylums. They're terrorists. I mean, you have terrorists pouring in at a level that we have not seen maybe ever. And what they're doing to our country is incredible. They're poisoning our country. And we're going to close up our border, and we're going to deport the people. We're going to get them out because no country can sustain what we're going through right now.
Fact-checking some of the details in there is just, it'll consume too much time, right? But what does it tell you, Brad, that kind of xenophobia is a winning issue for Trump?
Oh, I don't think that's what it is. I think the fact that the border is out of control and the Biden administration has made the problem worse is what's a bigger problem. The key portion of this electorate are going to be people who may not always like the way Trump talks or his choice of words, but they don't like the way Joe Biden's policies are acted. And immigration is going to be number one on that. Immigration and prices both. And that's going to be the pull and push of this campaign. Can the Biden campaign demonstrate that, in fact, they're going to take a new direction on immigration and on the economy? They're going to move more to the center? Or can Trump convince voters that to look past some of the rhetoric they don't like?
You could make the case that the immigration system is broken. I don't think many people will argue about that. But talking about poisoning the blood of the country,
the numbers of illegal immigrants and encounters on the border are what's going to drive this election. It's not going to end up being about Donald Trump's rhetoric. It's going to end up being about the numbers under Joe Biden and the reality American citizens are seeing in cities across the country.
This is a golden oldie for Donald Trump, right? It worked for him in 2016. Let's remember the first thing he said was he went after Mexican immigrants, calling them rapists and criminals. So he goes to this over and over again. It's funny because, you know, what he's talking about, there's zero evidence that countries are opening up their insane asylums and their jails and letting these people go to the border. That did happen once. You and I remember that. It happened in Cuba when Castro opened up the insane asylums and the jails, and a lot of good people and a lot of crazy people came at the same time. And I actually think he's kind of like taking a page from that historical occurrence, Mariel, in 1980, and using it with zero evidence. And we do have a problem. And the problem is that there's countries like Cuba, like Venezuela, which you can't pronounce, like Nicaragua, and Haiti. 3 of those are ruled by left-wing dictators who are anti-American. Haiti is a complete basket case right now and getting worse by the minute. And there's no controlling of that, and there's no cooperation from those countries. They don't even want to take deportees back. And so it is a problem that's not one day in the making, 1 year in the making. It's been a decade or more in the making. And Joe Biden needs to remind people, I hope he does so in the State of the Union, that the reason we don't have border policy right now, the border could be shut right now. The reason it's not is because Donald Trump ordered his minions in Congress not to pass the border bill.
Now, Joe Biden said, if you pass this bill, then I will shut it down. But he acknowledged that there are executive actions he could take. He could re-implement Remain in Mexico.
No, he can't, Brad, because Mexico won't go along. I mean, I just don't want to. I don't want to litigate that because Mexico says no, it's not going to uphold it, so it's a moot point. I mean, we can go over that all we want.
It's the president's job to negotiate with foreign countries. It's the president's job.
They are talking to Mexico, Brad, and Mexico has said no. I mean, let's just be clear, but I get what you're saying, but that's a political talking point. That's not a policy reality. I just want to be clear about that.
It's not a political talking point if it's a policy difference between the administrations. And of course, it's on the burden on former President Trump. It's on burden on him to decide how he would get that policy back reinstated, how he could convince Mexico to play along. There is a reason independents currently choose President Trump, former President Trump, on his immigration policies versus President Biden. Many of these same people voted for President Biden, but they don't think what they got in the last 4 years is what they voted for.
What is not a political talking point is the very real legislation that was crafted in a bipartisan fashion with the help of people like Senator Langford. Not exactly a liberal, right?
Not a liberal at all.
Very much of a conservative, and that was squashed because of Donald Trump.
No, it was squashed because the Republican House wasn't even consulted. You can't just hatch a plan with 5 people in the U.S. Senate and decide that the House has to go along.
It was squashed because Donald Trump gave the order and his minions said yes,
Speaker Johnson had already said it was dead because they hadn't consulted the House.
Donald Trump says he squashed it.
He
says, give me the credit.
I wish we had more time to continue the conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. Ana Navarro, Brad Todd, thank you both. Still to come, our coverage continues on this Super Tuesday. Plus, Palestinians running for aid in Gaza as a hunger crisis there worsens. The desperate conditions adding to the urgency for a ceasefire. We'll break down where negotiations stand right now as CNN News Central continues.
Warnings of a full-blown famine in Gaza are now giving way to graphic images, and we must warn you that you will likely find them disturbing. Palestinian children with emaciated bodies and sunken eyes being treated at a clinic in southern Gaza. You can hear them crying. A nurse at that clinic saying that children suffering from malnutrition and from a range of diseases are arriving now in unprecedented numbers. UN experts are now accusing Israel of intentionally starving the Palestinian people. They say civilians seeking humanitarian aid and humanitarian convoys are being targeted. Israel has denied these charges. We have CNN's Paula Hancock's in Abu Dhabi for us. Paula, increasingly urgent warnings about starvation in Gaza from international agencies who make it into that war-ravaged enclave. What can you tell us?
Well, Brianna, we have been hearing these warnings for months now. NGOs, humanitarian groups, saying this is what would end up happening if there wasn't more humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. And this is what is happening. We have just heard from the WHO as well, the World Health Organization, that managed to get a team into northern Gaza, said a growing number of children are dying in Gaza. The health ministry in Gaza, run by Hamas, says some 15 children have died of malnutrition and dehydration at this point. We can't independently confirm those figures, though, as international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. But one thing that caught me as well was the WHO saying that 1 in 6 children under the age of 2 is acutely malnourished, and they have pointed out that that is back in January, so the situation is likely to be far worse today. It is the worst case of child malnutrition anywhere in the world. They're also pointing out that in the north, malnutrition is 3 times higher than it is in the south of Gaza, where some aid is getting through. Humanitarian groups, UN aid groups, finding it increasingly difficult to get to the northern part. And we are hearing from Biden administration officials once again that at least one of those crossings in the northern part of Gaza, which borders Israel, should be opened by Israel to allow the humanitarian aid to get through. We heard from US President Joe Biden saying there are no excuses not to let more aid in, and we're hearing from humanitarian aid groups saying they warned that this was going to be the situation. Children are bearing the brunt of not getting enough humanitarian aid in, and it needs to change very quickly. Brianna.
Very clearly from the pictures. Paula Hancock, thank you for that report.
Heading into today's primaries are at least 7 states whose voters have the option to vote no preference or uncommitted. They include battleground North Carolina, Minnesota, Colorado, and Massachusetts. Now, this may or may not present a problem for President Biden, given what happened last month in Michigan, where a sizable percentage of voters organized and cast an uncommitted protest vote over his handling of the crisis in Gaza. Joining us now is Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. There is no deal yet for a pause in hostilities, and we're watching closely to see if one is finalized before Ramadan in just 5 days. That has been the target. If there is a deal and it does hold, do you think that's enough to assuage concerns among Democrats who feel the White House isn't doing enough on this issue?
So I'm going to talk about this very specifically because I'm meeting with people that are concerned all the time, and I have family members, many family members that live in my district or lived in a district that I used to represent who aren't sleeping at night. But I don't want to take the premise that people that are voting uncommitted are all about this. There was a campaign in Michigan called Listen to Michigan. There are Democrats that are concerned about that, but there are a lot of other issues that uncommitted on both sides. Nobody ever talks about those that are voting uncommitted for Donald Trump or will never vote for Donald Trump either. But I am going to tell you that people are hurting in Michigan, and I don't think we should be talking about it from a political who you're voting for right now. This is a humanitarian issue. You just saw those pictures. I have family members who have lost 40 members, 20 members in their families, but now they have nieces, nephews, cousins who are in desperate shape. We have got to get humanitarian aid to Gaza, and I think many people believe what Hamas did was a terrorist act. It was an act of evil, but what we are watching now is destroying the hearts and souls of people around the world.
Congresswoman, some of the harshest criticism we've heard from the administration toward what's happening in Gaza came from Vice President Kamala Harris over the weekend. She called the situation in the enclave inhumane, a humanitarian catastrophe. She went further than President Biden has up until this point. Do you think that message would carry more weight with your constituents if it came directly from President Biden?
Look, I've had private conversations with both the president and the vice president. There is no room between them. She has felt very strongly. I know the president does. The president is the one that's talking directly to the prime minister. I know he is trying to get this temporary ceasefire, which I pray goes to a permanent ceasefire. I do not believe the vice president would have made such a strong statement if they were not together. I hope the president is announcing a ceasefire very soon. I know he is putting pressure, and he's been very public about the humanitarian crisis. Nobody with a heart or soul can watch what is happening there and not be worried and know that we have to do something. More than 30,000 people have died. It may be up to 14,000 children. We have to do something. It's just not acceptable.
Congresswoman, obviously the State of the Union speech is on Thursday. It's going to be a huge opportunity for President Biden to get his re-election message out there. What are you hoping to hear from President Biden? Are you hoping that he says some of what you're saying that he shares with you in private publicly during the State of the Union?
So I think that the State of the Union is an opportunity for him to lay out his vision for the future, what he wants to do in his next term. He cannot not talk about this. This is on the hearts and minds of people across the country. And I keep thinking we're going to have that temporary ceasefire any minute. and I hope he's able to talk about this and address it. I would be very surprised if he did not very directly, and I have no inside information, address the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Anybody who cares and has compassion cannot ignore it.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.
We have some breaking news. Independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona says that she is not running for re-election. She says she's going to be leaving the Senate at the end of the year. Let's get straight now to CNN Chief Congressional Correspondent Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. Manu, get us up to speed here.
Yeah, this is very significant. Of course, Kyrsten Sinema has been a key player in the Senate for several years now, being the center of a number of negotiations here in the Senate, someone who has actually gotten a lot of pushback, anger from the left flank of her party, ultimately drove her from the Democratic Party, became an independent senator, caucusing with the Democrats. But there's been a key question about the Senate race this year, the Senate map, about what Kyrsten Sinema would do in this critical swing seat of Arizona. She just announced she is going to step aside, will not run for re-election in November, which will change the dynamics in that very critical Senate race in Arizona. She just put out a lengthy statement explaining her decision to step aside. She talked about the need to work together, how the need for civility and for compromise. She said that she laments the fact that, in her words, compromise is a dirty road. She said we have arrived at a crossroad and we choose anger and division, and ultimately she says that it's time for her to step aside. This will change how this Senate race could eventually turn out. If she were to run, it would be uncertain whether she would pull support from the Democratic side or the Republican side. There's a Republican candidate who is running in that race, Kari Lake, the former gubernatorial candidate. There's a Democratic candidate, also Ruben Gallego. He's a Democratic candidate as well. I just talked to Steve Daines, who's the chairman of the Senate GOP campaign committee. He told me that he believes that Sinema's decision to step aside will ultimately boost Kari Lake's chance in this pivotal race. But there's not only going to have an impact on the map here, Brianna, but also on the Senate as well. Several of these deal maker types, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, Mitt Romney, all saying that they will not run for re-election. That will ultimately change the makeup of the Senate, whether they can cut deals, and have implications too for the next president. Brianna.
Yeah, huge development here with Kyrsten Sinema saying she'll be leaving the Senate at the end of this year. Manu Raju, live for us on the Hill. Thank you, and we'll be right back. Super Tuesday today, including in Utah, where it is caucus day.
Yeah, it could be a great opportunity for Nikki Haley to score a win against Donald Trump. A win she has yet to come across, except for here in D.C.
That's right.
Yeah, the primary here. CNN's Brian Todd is in Utah for us. So, Brian, what are the chances that Haley can pull off an upset?
Well, Boris, most people don't predict her to pull off the upset tonight, but she could chip into Trump's delegate count. She could conceivably pull off an upset only in that Donald Trump has kind of had a history of lukewarm political support in the caucuses/primary season in the state. In 2016, Donald Trump lost the Utah caucuses handily to Ted Cruz. So that's what kind of Nikki Haley and her camp are counting on. They're also counting on a couple of other things. The fact that the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, the Republican governor, has said basically he doesn't like Donald Trump or Joe Biden as candidates. He likes Nikki Haley as a candidate. He has not formally endorsed her, but the governor's wife, Abby Cox, has endorsed Nikki Haley, as has the lieutenant governor, Deirdre Henderson. She has endorsed Nikki Haley. So you've got that as a pull for Haley in the state. Also, you've got the Mitt Romney factor, the popular U.S. senator who's retiring, obviously a very harsh critic of Donald Trump over the years. Will Mitt Romney's influence maybe influence some Republican voters here to swing to Nikki Haley? Here's what I can show you about the caucus site. This is a very dynamic caucus site. In about 5.5 hours, the caucus goers will arrive here at Alta High School, newly renovated, massive high school here at the foot of the Wasatch Mountains here. Beautiful view of the mountains behind me, you can see. But we've got hundreds of voters who will start to converge here in about 5.5 hours. They will caucus here. They'll hear speeches. Then they'll all vote at one time. Now, the one thing that could help Donald Trump here, that will be a strong pull Donald Trump's way, is that the caucus system here was adopted in 2016. It's run by the Republican Party, not the state, and that tends to draw more conservative voters. That may favor Donald Trump, so that could be where he really picks up support here tonight. We'll know in a few hours, guys.
Yeah, the Beehive State going to be buzzing, right? We know with you, Brian Todd, there in Utah. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
You like that. We're entertained by that. All right, ahead on CNN News Central, we have much more of our Super Tuesday coverage and also a new satellite. Could be critical to the fight against climate change, giving scientists the chance to do something that they've never been able to do before.
A new satellite promises to do something that's been tough when it comes to combating climate change, actually hold someone accountable.
Yeah, for the first time, a satellite will help track excess methane emissions. This is a key driver of the rise in global temperatures. Here's CNN's Bill Weir.
3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff, Falcon 9.
Paid for by the likes of billionaire Jeff Bezos and other donors, the nonprofit Environmental Defense Fund just launched a new kind of eye in the sky.
Vehicle is 50 on range.
Methane Sat is designed to circle the Earth every 95 minutes or so, and with cutting-edge detail, spot plumes and leaks of planet-cooking pollution long associated with the production of natural gas. If carbon dioxide is a blanket of average thickness overheating the Earth for centuries, methane is like a blanket 7 feet thick, with over 80 times the heat-trapping power of CO2 for about 2 decades after its release. Sometimes it leaks from old equipment or orphan wells, and sometimes when there's no one to buy it, companies just burn it in a practice known as flaring.
What we found here in the Permian Basin is that operators are wasting enough gas to heat about 2 million homes a year.
In 2021, EDF took us up over the oil and gas fields of Texas to sniff out methane leakers with a specially equipped airplane.
So this is carbon dioxide down here? Yeah. And this is methane.
But now they can fly over every oil and gas basin in the world, where 80% of global supplies are fracked and pumped.
We can basically create a movie of what's going on with respect to methane emissions. Before, we could just take snapshots when we had a plane in the air and we can get permission to fly. This is a whole new game. It really creates an enormous leap forward in our ability to really understand greenhouse gas emissions.
While other satellites can spot methane, what they find is often kept private. But EDF says that in about 18 months, their data will be open and free on Google Earth Engine for anyone to see.
You just have a real clarity now, a clarity we've never had before. And I think people realize you don't have to accept what somebody says, whether that's a government or a company. You can actually directly look at it, see what it is, and that is completely different than anything we've ever had for greenhouse gases. What I refer to is we're going to have radical transparency.
And what has been the response from big oil and gas companies that you're doing this?
Well, I think many of the companies see this as a real opportunity because they really do believe, and I suspect they're right, that they're doing a good job, but many of them aren't. It gives countries and companies the tools to select who they buy gas from and where that gas comes from. So the first time they'll have the ability to make really informed decisions, and those informed decisions will have an enormous positive impact on the climate.
Really a fascinating effort. Our thanks to Bill Weir for that report.
Will today prove to be Nikki Haley's last stand? Super Tuesday may be her last chance to show that she deserves to continue her shot at the Republican nomination. We're going to look at where her campaign stands now. Today, Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley is firing back after former President Trump says she has no path to the nomination.
This is not personal. This is about the fact that we have to win. We can want to change the country all day long, but if we can't win an election, we can't do any of that.
Let's discuss this big day, Super Tuesday, with former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Do you see a path for Nikki Haley?
Well, it's certainly a narrow path that she has, and this election day, Super Tuesday, with 854 delegates at stake, is a critical day for her. I think there's a couple things that she needs to show. One, she needs to win at least one state. I think she has to have an outright win. She won Washington, D.C. It'd be good to have another one. Secondly, she needs to hold Donald Trump under the 60% threshold, which means there's over 40% of the electorate that's saying that we need to go a different direction. That makes her a player as she moves on from Super Tuesday. It is a narrow path, but it is a path if she can achieve those objectives on this particular day.
If she doesn't do that, if she drops out, do you see her endorsing Trump?
You know, of course, she indicated that she would endorse him, even if he was a convicted felon in the debate. I believe she has retreated from that, which was a smart move. And so I think that remains up in the air. Obviously, we all want to support the Republican nominee, but she's made it clear that Donald Trump will take our country and our party in the wrong direction. I second that motive, and so I'm hoping someone else will come out of the convention. So I think it is unpredictable exactly what she will do after Super Tuesday. We will see. There's a narrow path there, and she's got to decide whether she wants to pull out or whether she wants to be a disruptor or whether she thinks the cards can fall just right so that she can win. But clearly, she's garnered a significant amount of support, as demonstrated by the fact that 40% is getting close to the number that says we don't want to have Donald Trump as our nominee.
What are your concerns? What do you think a Trump presidency would look like policy-wise?
Well, he has already redefined the Republican Party in his own image, which means that it is a pro-Putin Donald Trump message that he conveys versus being for Ukraine, for freedom, supporting our allies. He wants to engage in isolationism. That is a dramatic shift for the Republican Party. He wants to pull back America's leadership and voluntarily withdrawing from the world stage. Then he wants to put a ring around America and recreate the tariff wars that even with our allies. So those are dramatic changes. And the policy differences with Donald Trump needs to be magnified. People need to understand those, not just his temperament, not just his style, not just his grievances and the risk that he poses, but his policies are bad for a second administration, and that needs to be emphasized.
Governor, you may have seen just here in this hour, Independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema has just announced she is leaving the Senate at the end of the year. She's not seeking re-election. And I wonder what you think of her explanation. She said, quote, "Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year." And she pointed to her bipartisan victories, but she said, quote, "It's all or nothing. The outcome less important than beating the other guy. Compromise is a dirty word." What do you think about that?
Well, that's an important message, and I believe she's being honest in her comment that you have two political parties that want to fight to a large extent versus trying to get things done. There's clearly differences between the major parties, but whenever you look at the opportunities, whether it's border security, they've got to work together to get things done for America. And she's frustrated by that, and rightfully so. It also reflects that in Arizona, it's a very difficult route to go an independent. You have the two major parties carrying sway. There's just a loyalty there that makes it difficult for an independent or a third party effort. And I think that's the lesson to be learned from what she's doing today.
Governor Hutchinson, we appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you. Thank you, Brianna.
And primaries are all about expectations. So what are the campaign's expectations for Super Tuesday? We're going to break that all down after a quick break.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Thanks so much for joining us on CNN News Central this afternoon. I'm Boris Sanchez alongside Brianna Keeler in Washington, and we start with breaking news from the nation's capital. Independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona announcing she will not run for re-election, a decision that could pave the way for a Republican successor, something that would dramatically shift the makeup of the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, let's get straight now to CNN Chief Congressional Correspondent Manu Raju, who is on Capitol Hill. Manu, tell us what Sinema said about her decision.
Well, she really laments the state of politics. Sinema has been a key player during the Biden administration. It was key to legislation that has become law, such as the infrastructure law, as well as the CHIPS and Science Act, codifying same-sex marriage. Also tried to push forward a bipartisan border security deal that Republicans blocked earlier this year. But she's also been someone who has faced relentless criticism, mostly from the left flank, because of her defense of the Senate's filibuster, efforts to try to weaken that filibuster rule to allow legislation to pass along a simple majority. In the last Congress, she rejected that. Her and Joe Manchin and the like prevented that from essentially being changed. As a result, she's faced a lot of pushback. She ultimately decided to become an independent and caucus with Democrats, and she weighed whether to run for re-election as independent, but announcing just moments ago it was time for her to step aside from the Senate because of what she said because of her concerns about the state of our politics. Listen.
We've arrived at that crossroad, and we chose anger and division. I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now. I love Arizona, and I am so proud of what we've delivered. Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year.
But this is going to have major ramifications for control of the United States Senate. She had weighed that third-party bid in a race to keep this seat. Right now, Ruben Gallego, who's a progressive Democrat, is running in the Democratic primary. Kari Lake, a conservative Republican running in the Republican primary. If she were to run, it was unclear how that would impact things. One side believed it could help the other side. And I just talked to Senator Steve Daines, who's the Senate GOP campaign chairman, who believes that this will actually bolster Kari Lake's chances, the concerns being that Sinema could have siphoned away some moderate Republican vote who might not have been willing to support Kari Lake. Of course, the Democrats see it the opposite side. But nevertheless, Arizona is going to be one of the most significant races to watch this November, something that could determine control of the United States Senate and would have huge ramifications for the next president, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump. So this moment, significant for the Senate, significant for the makeup of the chamber, the deal making that happens in this body, but also for who controls it come November. Guys.
Yeah. All right, Manu, thank you for that.
The other big headline this afternoon, if you haven't heard, it's Super Tuesday. Today, over 2,000 delegates are at stake across two parties, 16 states, and one U.S. territory. All those numbers could very well add up to a rematch that polls show most Americans don't even want. President Joe Biden against former President Donald Trump.
And you keep acknowledging American Samoa, and I'm so glad that you do for that.
Should be recognized.
They should be. All right, so today, former President Trump hoping to end Nikki Haley's underdog campaign for good with a Super Tuesday sweep, and President Biden as the incumbent expecting to coast to the Democratic nomination, even as headwinds on immigration, the Israel-Hamas war, and inflation threaten to dismantle his 2020 coalition. We're covering this across the board the only way that CNN can. Let's start with the John Berman in Colorado for us. All right, Berman, so the Supreme Court reinstating Trump's eligibility for the Colorado primary yesterday. What are voters saying?
Well, first of all, I can confirm that, in fact, it is Super Tuesday. You are 100% right about that, Brianna. And this is Castle Rock, Colorado, and this is an in-person voting location. Now, I'm stressing that because it's one of 150 places you can vote in person today, and there has been a slow but steady trickle of people. Why not that many? Because most people in this state vote in drop boxes or by mail. You can actually vote in a drop box here today. You can show up with your ballot already filled in and put it in that box right there, then walk out and go about your business here in beautiful Colorado. If you do want to vote here today, you get your ballot over there, you fill it in, and then you put it in that box separately right there. Now, Brianna, I can show you here. We have some sample ballots. You mentioned Donald Trump, the Supreme Court ruling, where the Supreme Court said that states can't bar Trump from being on the ballot for being an insurrectionist. You can see his name is on the ballot right there. It would have been on the ballot anyway. It has been on the ballot because of a stay in the earlier court ruling, but the Supreme Court just clarified that. On the Democratic side, one thing I want to point out, you can see in the small print at the bottom, non-committed delegates. In Michigan, uncommitted votes became a little bit of an issue there. Doesn't seem to be the level of campaign here for uncommitted voters, but if that number does get above 15%, they would have delegates at the Democratic convention. We have seen voters here. We did have a chance to talk to a few of them more than 100 feet away from the doors here. That's the rules. Listen to what they said about why they were here. What's the most important issue to you?
Immigration.
Immigration?
Yeah.
How so?
I think that we need to secure the borders and make sure that everything is handled appropriately. The people that come in the country, we help them, but then it's also done in the right way.
Who's the best candidate to handle that, do you think?
I picked Trump.
And who'd you pick?
I voted for Trump.
So you voted in the Democratic primary?
Today.
Why?
I think it's all about democracy this year.
And who'd you vote for?
Joe Biden.
So you can see, Brianna, the competing views of this campaign from the voters who are showing up here to cast their in-person ballots. Nearly a million people, I should say, have already voted here in Colorado. Brianna?
And John, in your conversations with voters, did the Supreme Court decision come up in any way?
I did speak to one voter who said the number of court cases involving Donald Trump has motivated her to vote for Donald Trump. So for voters, I think, inclined to vote for Trump already, it is a motivating factor that pushes them to support him perhaps even more. Boris?
Interesting tidbit there. John Berman live from Castle Rock, Colorado. Thanks so much, John. Let's take you now to Virginia and CNN's Jessica Dean. There's a fierce battle for the suburbs of Virginia. Jessica, what are you hearing from voters?
Well, Boris, we are in the suburbs of Richmond. So this is the type of place and the type of voters that, especially in a general election in a very purple state like Virginia, are going to make a huge difference. And so we are outside this polling location, which is at an elementary school. That's the law here in Virginia. We can't be inside, and we're appropriately away from the door. But we did talk to one voter earlier. Our colleague Elena Treen caught up with this voter. He called himself a recovering Republican who did not vote for Trump, but did vote for Nikki Haley this time. Here's what he said.
If it ends up being a Trump versus Biden rematch, do you know who you'd vote for?
Yeah, I'll hold my nose and vote for Biden again. I just think I have moral objections to, and moral and political objections to the way Donald Trump ran his campaign and served in office, and some of the choices he's made are, I think, just wrong for our country.
And Boris and Brianna, we did see voting not too long ago in those off-year elections here in Virginia back in November, where we saw Democrats take both chambers here in the state of Virginia, and abortion was one of the key issues. So it's places like this that we are really interested to see what voters are saying, what's on their mind. We'll keep talking to them throughout the day.
All right, and they are going to speak and speak loudly as they vote today. Jessica, thank you for that. All right, you heard from some voters. Now let's see what the candidates and the campaigns are saying. We have Kristen Holmes in Palm Beach. She's following all things Trump. We have Kylie Atwood in Charleston, South Carolina, where Nikki Haley is spending Super Tuesday. Kristen, to you first, how does the Trump campaign expect things to play out today?
Well, Brianna, look, they know that he's not going to become the presumptive nominee tonight. He's not going to meet that delegate threshold, but the hope is twofold. The first part of this is that they hope that he gets enough delegates so that he can reach that milestone next week, that he will become the presumptive nominee then. The other thing that they're hoping for is that there's a definitive enough win tonight that it essentially forces Nikki Haley out of the race. Now, they are keenly aware that Haley has not said what she would do after Super Tuesday, but they are not banking on her dropping out. They've already pivoted to a general election. Something interesting we just heard from Jess talking about those suburban voters in Virginia. All of this information that is coming out of Super Tuesday is information that Donald Trump's campaign is going to take into a general election. Who is showing up to vote? Where are people voting? What does enthusiasm look like within the Republican Party? They are going to be compiling all of this data as they try to figure out where they want to put their resources heading into November. And one thing I keep hearing from these senior advisors, they believe that every state, or at least most states, are in play, and they know that every single vote is going to count in this potential rematch with Joe Biden.
Kristen, thanks so much. Let's pivot to Kylie now and get some perspective from Haley world. Kylie, it speaks volumes that Nikki Haley isn't out on the campaign trail today.
Well, Nikki Haley said that she wanted to be at home. She wanted to be monitoring more than a dozen of states that are voting here in South Carolina. She was in Texas yesterday, and we should note that her campaign in Fort Worth was her final scheduled campaign rally. As she has said, that she is solely focused on Super Tuesday right now. People have asked what's next for her. If she's going to compete on March 12th, if she's going to take it to the convention to make it a brokered convention, a competitive convention. She has said it all rests on what happens on Super Tuesday. So that is significant. She was asked earlier today on Fox News if she would drop out if she doesn't have a successful night tonight. I want you to listen to how she responded to that. I also want you to take a listen in terms of how she described her voters. She was very defensive of them, very protective of them. Listen.
I don't know why everybody's so adamant that they have to follow Trump's lead to get me out of this race. You know, all of these people deserve to vote. 16 states want to have their voices heard. They don't want to be ignored. They don't want to be just said that that's nothing. They're actually quite something, and they want something different in our country, and I respect them tremendously for that.
Now, in the last few days, Nikki Haley has actually given a number of reasons for why she doesn't believe she is bound any longer to her pledge that she made last year to back the eventual nominee of the Republican Party. So that is a space for us to watch. But of course, we'll see what happens tonight as her campaign is hoping for at least a victory or two on this Super Tuesday.
Kylie Atwood, thanks so much for the update.
And still to come, we have our special coverage of Super Tuesday continuing. We're going to dip in on these polling places in Colorado, Texas. We're going to California. We're going to see what is driving turnout in those states.
And it's not just the presidential race that's got people fired up. We're taking a look at some of those key down-ballot primaries happening today. Those stories and much more still ahead on CNN News Central. We're just a few hours away from the first polls closing, but there's still a lot to talk about on this Super Tuesday, including a surprising headline we got today out of Capitol Hill.
Yeah, that's right. Independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema saying that she's out at the end of the year. She's done. She's not going to seek re-election. So let's talk about everything with our panel of political experts. And it's really interesting, you guys, when you look at the explanation that she gave here. She said, "Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year."
Well, that sounds a lot nicer than "because I have no path to
I'm in
win."
third.
You're right.
I'm in third. That's a shorter version.
Yeah, that doesn't, that's just not as pretty to say in a. Listen, I saw former Senator Jeff Flake during the summer, where he's serving as ambassador of Turkey, and we were talking about this race somewhat. And he's somebody that had to face the same reality of not having a path. And there's just not a path for an independent in Arizona right now, and certainly not for Kyrsten Sinema.
How much of it just has to do with the politics of the moment? Because she was one of the architects of this bipartisan Senate deal to try to bring aid to Ukraine and to address issues at the border. And it may be that some of that failure, aside from the political reality in Arizona, discouraged her.
Yeah, and also, look, the Democratic Party, myself included, has said goodbye, good riddance to her, because she did stall some key pieces of the bipartisan legislation that we have championed over these last few years. But some of this, I think we've talked about it before. She has a bit of an ego, and as we're talking about, she doesn't have a path forward. Where does she go afterwards? And I think this helps Arizona Democratic Party and Republican Party figure out their paths for their nominees in order to, hopefully, one of them wants to get one of these seats.
The Democratic base might have said goodbye to her, but she was important in keeping Chuck Schumer where he is.
She's not far. She's not left enough. I mean, just like Mitt Romney's not conservative enough to be nominated in his state. She's not far left enough. The Democratic Party has moved so far left that Kyrsten Sinema, who came from the left part of the Democratic Party, when she went to the House, she no longer has a home.
Well, and if you take her at her word that the reason why she's leaving is not necessarily just because she's in third place, but because being in the Senate is not the most fun place to be these days, or the place where you can actually get a ton done. I mean, you're seeing all sorts of retirements from folks kind of in the political center, the pragmatic types who are looking at the environment in Washington and saying, I don't think I can actually do anything positive here in elected office. So I don't think this is the last of the big retirements that we may see over the coming years.
Yeah, that's you're right. And the reality may be that to sort of be there in the Senate, in the center, in the Senate, or anywhere, means you are going to be in third place. Maybe that's also a message which I think we can agree on here. What does that mean then, Kristen, about what Congress is going to look like and sound like and legislate like when you have all those people leaving?
Well, certainly it's going to mean that you have a lot less experience. And for many voters right now, that's actually a positive. They think there needs to be more turnover. They want to see fresh voices, fresh faces. But with that said, there is some benefit to having institutional knowledge in these chambers. It helps to get things done. So if you're a voter who, on the one hand, thinks there's too many people there that have been too long, we need fresh faces, but are also, why isn't Congress getting anything done? There is some contradiction there to those two things when push comes to shove.
The biggest change we're going to see is the absence of Mitch McConnell as a Republican leader. You know, Kyrsten Sinema has been a thorn in the side of the Democratic base for a long, long time, really irritates them. But she's also been key to help craft these bipartisan deals, many of which have ended up being legislation passed by Joe Biden, signed by Joe Biden. So she's, you know, kind of like in that mavericky model of Arizona. And I think this is very good for Ruben Gallego. Ruben Gallego is a former Marine. He is Hispanic, very smart, very likable. And he's going to be running against Kari Lake, who I think many, many Republicans who would have voted for John McCain or for Jeff Flake are going to find too extreme.
Let's pivot to the voting that's happening today and Super Tuesday. Brad, before we came on, you were walking us through where on the map today Nikki Haley has the best chance of winning some delegates. What do you think the minimum she has to accomplish tonight is to keep her campaign going?
Well, frankly, we won't know till the morning when the contributions come in. You know, presidential candidates never quit because of politics. They quit because fundraising dries up. And so if she feels like she's still raising enough money, and in this day and age that means money over the internet, it comes in small and moderate donations, and it happens instantaneously reacting to the news, I think that's the question. The question is not how many delegates she wins tonight, and she could win some. She could win some in Northern Virginia. I think Vermont's an opportunity. I think Utah's an opportunity for her. Minnesota might be an opportunity. So she could win a few delegates, but I think the question will be, does she believe her donors will be there tomorrow?
Where would Nikki Haley voters go, do you think?
Well, that's a question that I have, that I've had at the beginning of this primary season, is that, you know, she's trying to appeal to the never Trump Republicans, the Republicans who are tired of Donald Trump. But then what happens in the general? We know that, you know, a third-party race would unfortunately, a third-party candidate would unfortunately hand over the election to Donald Trump. So do they go over to Joe Biden, like the voter we saw in the block before who said he would hold his nose and go vote for Joe Biden? Are some of her supporters going to go to Joe Biden? And are some prominent voices that don't believe in Donald Trump in the Republican Party, are they going to hold their nose and vote for President Biden?
I think there are two types of voters who have been going for Nikki Haley in these primaries. The first are self-identified Republicans who really just wish Donald Trump was not the direction their party was going. But at the end of the day, I think in a general are probably going to come home and vote Republican. They will hold their nose and they will vote for Donald Trump. That's most of the self-ID'd Republicans. But you've had in places like New Hampshire and in South Carolina a lot of disaffected Democrats, some independents participating. They hate that they think their choices might be Biden and Trump, and they wanted to do whatever they could to not have to face that choice in November. Those voters, I can see a sizable number of them actually winding up and going to Biden.
Republicans have a habit and tradition of coming home and lining up behind the nominee. But we are seeing very strong voices like Mitt Romney saying, hell no. Well, he doesn't say hell. He doesn't cuss. That's me, Mitt. Voices like Liz Cheney saying there's no way that we're going to vote for Romney and so for Trump. So let us see what happens as we get closer. I think there's going to be some of both. I think a lot of them are going to come home, but I think there's going to be a significant number, maybe just enough, that don't vote for Trump.
Especially in those Biden-Trump districts, that helps, you know, keep that Republican majority very slim in the midterms. I think in those areas we will see some of this.
I think it's in Donald Trump's interest, actually, for Nikki Haley to stay in the race all the way through. Because I think there are people who have misgivings about him in the Republican Party. It's 20-25%. I think if they have the chance to vote against him in the primary, it's much easier for him to bring them home in the general. I know it's a little counterintuitive, but I think when you are a primary candidate who has a section that's unhappy, you need to let the horses run. a little bit.
How do you bring them home when you're saying to them, if you're not supporting me, if you're supporting her, get out of the party?
I think, again, Joe, the election in the end will not end up being about Donald Trump's rhetoric. It's going to be about Joe Biden's record. And I think that Trump's best hope is for him to be able to put that focus back on Joe Biden and be able to welcome people back after they voted for somebody else.
I constantly wish that during these panels we had more time. Unfortunately, we got to leave it there. Brad, Anna, Kristen, Alencia, thank you all so much. So 16 states are voting today on Super Tuesday, but North Carolina is the only real swing state among them. Ahead, what we might be able to learn from a state which could be critical come November. You're watching CNN News Central. We're back in just a few minutes.
Kitchen table issues are on the minds of many voters as they're heading to the ballot box this Super Tuesday. Immigration, the economy, reproductive rights as well.
Yeah, and in the battleground state of North Carolina, they have the potential to decide not just the presidential race, but a closely watched gubernatorial campaign. CNN national correspondent Diane Gallagher is talking to North Carolina voters in the city of Cornelius. Diane, turnout has been fairly steady where you are. What are you hearing from voters?
Turnout is quite steady here in Cornelius. You can probably see a little bit behind me. We're having a bit of a line that's starting to develop here outside of Town Hall. Now, North Carolina election rules prevent me from getting any closer to these voters here, but we've started to see this build throughout the afternoon. And voters themselves are enthusiastic when they show up, telling me that they are passionate about the people that they are choosing to vote for. And they especially enjoy the idea that North Carolina may have a deciding factor in the national vote come November when it comes to the president. But they're also looking again at those down ballot races. Now, in terms of the issues, I can say especially this afternoon, I've had many voters talk to me about abortion and immigration, adding in education and the economy here as well. I spoke with a Biden voter and a Trump voter about why they made the decision they did with their ballot today.
Trump.
Why?
I like his policies. I liked him when he was in office. It works for me.
His values are very in line with ours, and we are nowhere in a better place than we were 4 years ago.
So again, the turnout here looking nice and steady today. More than 695,000 early and absentee ballots were also cast. And look, Boris, Brianna, this is the first statewide election that we have used voter ID here in North Carolina. They say that during that early period, about a little more than 200 people had to cast provisional ballots because of issues with identification. We're going to be watching to see how that might impact the vote later today as well.
Yeah, that line, an encouraging sign for turnout. Diane Gallagher, thanks so much.
When we come back, it's the biggest test of the U.S. election infrastructure before November. How officials are keeping a close eye on cybersecurity threats this Super Tuesday.
With voting underway in numerous states across the country, U.S. officials tell CNN that they're not seeing any specific or credible threats to Super Tuesday's elections. The Biden administration is working with states to closely monitor both cyber and physical threats to the voting process. Let's discuss now with Chris Krebs. He's a former senior official at the Department of Homeland Security. He also served as the first director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency during the Trump administration. Chris, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. You say there are three types of threats that officials monitor on Super Tuesday. What are they?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, dating back to 2016, there is a heightened concern around cybersecurity threats, technical attacks on critical infrastructure. The good news is the intelligence community and those in the cybersecurity space have not really seen any sort of Russian or Chinese activity that would be able to interfere with the casting, the counting, and the certification of the voting process. The second risk or threat that we're gravely concerned about is the continued disinformation and information operations that Russia, China, Iran, and others have been waging against the U.S. population and Europeans as well over the last several years. And even as recently as a couple weeks ago, researchers at Sentinel Labs talked about a doppelganger group out of Russia that was undermining confidence in German politics, specifically trying to undermine support for the conflict in Ukraine. That same group of operators has been here in the U.S. highlighting issues down at the border and even trying to stoke civil war. And then the third and final risk we're concerned about is physical threats, actual directed threats against election officials. The best example here is Stephen Richard down in Maricopa County, Arizona, tweeted out the other day that he had 6 different individuals from across the country that had made threats to Stephen or election officials in Maricopa had been arrested for those threats against those officials. So those are the 3 things I think folks are trying to keep in mind right now.
Yeah, a broad range of threats and risk. In December of last year, there was this declassified intelligence assessment that found that foreign government efforts to target the 2022 midterm elections apparently grew compared with the 2018 midterms. And you mentioned some of the countries that were aiming to meddle. I'm wondering what you're seeing now as we get closer to the 2024 general election.
Well, that intelligence report is required as a result of an executive order that President Trump issued prior to the 2018 election, where the intelligence community and CISA and the FBI have to go out and look and say, what attempts were there made to either interfere or influence U.S. politics around an election? When you think about the election cycles, in a midterm election versus a presidential year, you're always going to have more activity in a presidential year because the stakes are much larger. There is more attention to these races than those midterm congressional races. My sense, though, is that the playbook that has been established since 2016 has been copied. Just like in 2020, we saw the Iranians try to imitate the Proud Boys and intimidate voters. That is now, I think, going to be pretty much the standard operating procedure for most state security services that want to interfere in U.S. elections. But I think that the good news is today is it's kind of like what I said in 2020, where it's just another Tuesday on the internet. And there hasn't been a whole lot of activity that I think would be concerning in terms of threats against the election.
I'm glad to hear that, at least thus far. It's gone smoothly and it looks smoothly. Chris Krebs, appreciate the perspective. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Boris.
Of course. Brianna?
This just into CNN, we have some new reporting on Paul Whelan, the former Marine and American detained in Russia for more than 5 years now. He's now speaking out exclusively to CNN. He's sharing his concerns surrounding his detention following the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. CNN's Jennifer Hansler has more on this. Jennifer, what is he saying?
Well, Brianna, he says it is extremely worrying for him that Navalny passed under suspicious circumstances in a Russian prison, saying that this signals that the Russians could be willing to do that to just about anybody. Take a listen to what he had to say about this incident.
I can't say too much for obvious reasons, but one thing I will say is that if they can get to him, they can get to me. And what that means is, if they are willing to face the repercussions from the world for doing in somebody like Navalny, they are not going to think twice about doing in someone like me and then blaming the United States for not bothering to get me back in 5 years.
So he is again calling on the Biden administration to do whatever they can to secure his release after spending more than 5 years in Russian prison. He says he is confident that there is work being done on his behalf. After he spoke with Secretary of State Antony Blinken last month, he called that a very, very good call. I should also note, Brianna, that today is his 54th birthday. He called me saying that it is extremely odd to be spending his birthday in a Russian prison, but he said he was able to do some kinds of little celebrations with some of his prison mates there, and he said it made life almost bearable for a little while there. Secretary of State Antony Blinken last month said that the U.S. is still working to do whatever they can to bring both him and Evan Gershkovich home. Brianna?
Yeah, let's hope this is his last birthday behind bars there. Jennifer Hansler, thank you for that report. One of the biggest and most expensive races today is in California. Ahead, we're going to break down the stakes in the Senate race there. This is CNN News Central.
Breaking news into CNN. New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez was just indicted on a dozen new criminal charges. Let's bring in CNN's Kara Scannell. Kara, walk us through these new charges.
Yeah, Boris, a dozen new charges in this indictment against Senator Bob Menendez that was handed up today by a grand jury. This is all part of the same bribery scheme that prosecutors allege the senator was involved with, along with his wife and 3 New Jersey businessmen. They were accused of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes in the form of gold bars, cash, a Mercedes convertible, a low or no-show job. And in exchange, Menendez is accused of taking steps to help those New Jersey businessmen, as well as the governments of Egypt and Qatar. So among these new charges are what's called some of these substantive charges. He was charged with 4 counts of conspiracy before. That was acting as a foreign agent. That was committing honest services wire fraud. Now he's being hit with the underlying counts that go along with those charges, as well as new counts of conspiracy to obstruct justice and obstruction of justice. So he's facing now 12 new charges on top of the ones that he's already had. So a significant increase in his liability here, his potential liability in this case. Now, the senator has denied any wrongdoing vigorously. He's refused calls to step down as senator. He has challenged the U.S. government, the prosecutors, on his loyalty to the U.S., saying that he would never act as a foreign agent. So he has been putting on a strong defense here. He had been trying to get the fruits of some of these search warrants of his home in New Jersey, Washington, D.C., of his cell phones to be suppressed. But a judge this week denied that request, saying that all of the evidence that was picked up, including the gold bars, the cash, that's all for the government to use in its case. Now, these new charges, it's worth noting, comes just days after one of the New Jersey businessmen in this case pleaded guilty and has a cooperation deal with prosecutors. So now the prosecutors have one of the people that they say is part of this bribery scheme working with them. That may be why we're seeing these new charges against Menendez today. Now, I've reached out to Menendez's camp. I haven't heard back yet. But again, he has vigorously denied any wrongdoing and has pleaded not guilty to the previous charges. Boris?
Kara Scannell, an important update in that case. Thanks so much. Brianna?
In California, we've seen an intense and often bruising campaign in the race to fill the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's seat. Under the state's primary system, all candidates run on the same ballot, and regardless of party, the top 2 vote-getters advance. Congressman Adam Schiff has been the front-runner in recent polls, but fellow Democratic Congresswomen Katie Porter and Barbara Lee are also in the mix, as well as Republican and former L.A. Dodgers star Steve Garvey. CNN's Stephanie Elam is joining us now from a polling station in Santa Ana in Southern California there. What are you hearing from voters there, Steph?
Oh, Brianna, we have seen a slow, steady trickle of people coming here to vote in Santa Ana, just making their way in here and casting their vote. We've heard some people wanted to vote in person because they wanted to make sure that they felt like their vote was being counted. But a lot of people have voted by mail already or dropping off their ballot. We've seen people coming in, dropping off their ballot as well. That's been going on for a few weeks here as well. So it is different. You don't see as many, but they did set up these tents out here so that people could vote out here if there was an overflow as the day goes on. But you're right, that Senate race is really what a lot of people are focusing on here. We have seen Adam Schiff has raised the most money. His war chest, as far as the amount of money he has, is larger than everyone else. And what he's been doing is really targeting Republican Steve Garvey, who has not spent any money on ads. Meanwhile, in this election, there has been more than $71 million spent on advertising for just this. And since February, that number is larger than even how much has been spent on ads in the presidential election. So it's very consequential here. But we are seeing Schiff targeting Garvey because he's thinking it would be better odds for him to be going up against a Republican in November instead of another one of the Democrats, since they would have to battle for basically the same voting bloc. So what he's been doing is raising his profile, and it seems to be working. We have seen the numbers rising for Garvey in this election. The idea is California, the Democrats here outnumber Republicans 2-1. So he's thinking if he's up against a Republican, it'll make it more likely that he will win in November here. But obviously very consequential as they're going after this one seat, this one Senate seat, very important Senate seat here in California, Brianna.
And when people are voting for this Senate seat, they're voting twice for it. Explain this.
They are. There are 2 opportunities to vote for senator on the ballot. That's because one is to finish out Dianne Feinstein's term for the rest of the year, and then there's another one for the full 6-year term beginning in January. So people can decide that they want to vote for Barbara Lee for the first part of it, and then they want to vote for Steve Garvey for the second part for the whole 6-year term. They can totally do that. We'll see how that all shakes out, and people decide to do 2 different things here. But yes, there's a chance for 2 of those opportunities to fill senator for a short term and then again for the long term.
All right, we'll see how it shakes out. Stephanie Elam live for us in California. Thank you for that. So not all get out the vote calls are created equal. Ahead, one that could get more young voters out to the polls. After much anticipation and speculation, Taylor Swift is getting political. In a new Instagram post, the pop star encouraging her more than 282 million followers to cast ballots in their state's primaries today.
Remember, Swift endorsed President Joe Biden back in 2020, and recently far-right figures have promoted baseless conspiracy theories claiming that the singer's involved in a covert effort to help Biden win re-election. All the dots connect. But Swift stopped short of endorsing anyone, simply telling her followers to, quote, vote the people who most represent you into power.
So if you're wondering how Swift herself voted, considering she's currently on world tour in Singapore, well, welcome to 2024, because a source tells CNN that she voted by mail in Tennessee's primary. And Boris, I mean, she's really kind of a force to be reckoned with here, because on National Voter Registration Day on her Instagram, she told people to go to vote.org, and the group actually said that they had a surge of 35,000 registrations.
I think that's part of the reason you see those conspiracy theories. It's clearly a sign that they're scared of someone with that kind of platform, not even telling voters who to vote for, but just persuading them to take action and cast ballots.
Yeah, she's very influential.
She is. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Our special coverage of America's Choice 2024 Super Tuesday with Wolf Blitzer and Kate Baldwin starts in just about 15 seconds, 14 seconds.
It's the biggest election day of the year so far. Welcome to CNN's special coverage of Super Tuesday. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Kate Baldwin in New York. The first polls are closing in just a few hours from now. And turnout in states like North Carolina is strong as millions of Americans in 16 states are now voting. For Republicans, it is a big day. 865 delegates are at stake. Donald Trump expected to win most of them, making the Republican frontrunner almost unstoppable potentially by the end of this.
By tonight, Trump is expected to be within striking distance of the 1,215 delegates needed to win the Republican presidential nomination, which raises the big question, what does Nikki Haley do next? Now, in less than an hour, we'll be getting our first early clues about the outcome of tonight's vote. That's when we get the first results from our exit polls. We have our reporters fanned out across the nation right now as voters are heading to the polls. I want to start our special coverage with our David Culver. He's joining us tonight from San Jose, California, where people have been filing in to vote all day. David, I know you've been talking to a lot of folks on their way to cast their ballots. What's motivating these people out there to vote in this primary?
So the first response to that, Wolf, usually is, well, we're here to perform our civic duty, right? But then you start to peel back the layers a little bit, and 2 issues have surfaced in the folks we've spoken with already just in the past couple hours: immigration and economy. Now let's set the scene where we are. This is Santa Clara County's election center. This is part of the Silicon Valley area, so you got a big range in wealth, and you've got a working class here too, a huge Latino population, about 25 to 30%. The mail-in ballots are going to be the chunk of what comes in here. It's interesting to see all of these stacks. These are the votes have come in. They go through the processing here, and then they continue back through machines like this and get divided up into the many precincts in this area. So it's incredibly active, as they're obviously full speed ahead here on this Super Tuesday. But going to those voters, the folks who are filling out these ballots, you really get a sense that for a lot of them, this is becoming personal. And I asked one guy who showed up, his name's Pearson Randall, he's 24. What brought him out here on his lunch hour to cast a primary ballot? He said for him, it was to go a different direction for the country. Here's what he had to say. Do you feel like he's doing what you'd like to see the country continue doing in the next 4 years?
Personally, no. I'm not satisfied with President Biden. I would much rather...
Did you vote for him before?
I have, yes.
You're pretty upset with how this has turned out from your past vote?
Correct, yes. It is not... my situation is not improved like I thought it would under Biden. What I wish that I could have seen from him was a little bit more competent.
So here was the thing with Randall. I asked him, I said, if not President Biden again, who do you vote for, right? He says, well, I'm not really comfortable saying that. I said, well, let's go through the process. I started naming the candidates. Nikki Haley. He said, no, not the one. He said, really, he liked Vivek Ramaswamy, not an option on this ballot. I said, what about Donald Trump? He said, you know, I'm really not comfortable answering that question. And then he seems to have echoed what a lot of folks here in California have said to me in recent days, and that is he's not sure if who he is going to vote for is that positive of an answer, and he's worried about any sort of repercussions. Then he continued along with his day. Kate, I think by process of elimination, it seemed to point to one person, Donald Trump, but obviously it's between him and the ballot.
Yeah, it really speaks to that 7 in 10 that we've seen in polling, 7 in 10 Americans who aren't happy with the idea of a re-election matchup between a Joe Biden and a Donald Trump. You're really kind of seeing it with that struggle right there. It's great to see you. Thank you. David Culver is going to be there for us. Let's go now to Brian Todd, who's in Sandy, Utah, for a look. Polls are open there. Brian, this is a state that Nikki Haley is watching closely as one that she might have a chance of winning. Why is that?
Well, Kate, it's because of all the states that go fairly heavily red, Utah is the one state where Donald Trump does the least well traditionally. In 2016, he lost the Republican caucuses here pretty handily to Ted Cruz. There are other factors here that I'll talk about in just a second, but first, let me set the scene for you. This is a caucus site. It's not a traditional polling site for a primary. It's a caucus site, so the caucus goers have not come here yet. This is Alta High School here in Sandy, Utah. They're going to be coming in that entrance there. We're not allowed in yet because school is in session now as we speak, but in about 4 hours, the voters will start to arrive for the caucus session, which will be held inside those doors there. 32 precincts voting here, so they'll be caucusing in 32 different rooms, then casting ballots like this one. This is a kind of a sample ballot here. Nikki Haley, Donald Trump, and the third candidate Ryan Binkley on the ballot here. They cast their ballots, then they start counting at about 8 p.m. local time, 10 p.m. Eastern time. Hopefully we'll be able to bring all of that to you live because we're going to get access inside there once the caucusing begins. Talking about the Haley-Trump dynamic here, another reason, Kate, why Nikki Haley could do well here in Utah is because she's got some good endorsements on her side. The Republican governor, Spencer Cox, has not formally endorsed her, but he has said publicly that he likes Nikki Haley as a candidate. He does not like Donald Trump or Joe Biden as candidates. The governor's wife, Abby Cox, has endorsed Nikki Haley. The lieutenant governor, Deirdre Henderson, has endorsed Nikki Haley. So you've got key endorsements there. You've also got the Mitt Romney factor here in Utah. The retiring U.S. Republican senator, former presidential candidate, we know, of course, has been very critical of Donald Trump over the years. Will his pull matter in this state? It might. If she's going to have a chance to pull out a state, it might be here in Utah. And we're going to see how that vote plays out in the next few hours. Back to Wolf.
Brian Todd in Utah for us. Brian, thank you very much. We've got an excellent panel of our contributors here. Let me start with Gloria Borger. Gloria, polls are going to close in a few hours. It looks, at least right now, like it's going to be another very huge night for Donald Trump.
Yes, of course. A big night for Donald Trump. I think the question everyone will be asking by the end of the night is Nikki Haley going to stay in, or is she going to leave? But I also think what we ought to be looking at tonight very closely is these exit polls in states like North Carolina and Virginia, which will tell us a lot about what the voters believe about these two candidates. We already know that they don't like either one of them very much. We know that, according to one poll, more than 70% believe Joe Biden is too old to be president. And there are questions about Donald Trump and how he does with women in suburbia and I think with independent voters. And so I think by the end of the evening, maybe we'll have a picture of where the public is right now on Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Let me get Jonah Goldberg into this conversation because we're looking ahead as well. So far in these primaries that we've seen so far, we'll see what happens tonight. About 30% of the GOP primary voters have voted for someone other than Trump, as you know. So what does that suggest to you about looking down the road?
Yeah, so I don't think, just to pick up on Gloria's thing, I don't think Nikki Haley is going to drop out tonight regardless of the results. Remember, Pat Buchanan stayed in all the way to the convention in 1992. Bernie Sanders did likewise. She's now in a sort of issue campaign, and she's basically building and solidifying behind her. I don't think it's hers to control or anything, but a faction that is just not that into Donald Trump. And that's significant. Pat Buchanan in 1992 averaged over a course of all the primaries about 22%. Nikki Haley is overperforming that. And that puts her in a good place, sort of no matter what, but not to be president in 2024.
Or not to be necessarily the Republican nominee.
No, she will not be the Republican nominee in 2024.
Well, and the question is, where do those voters go? Do they end up with Joe Biden, or do they end up voting for Trump?
We've seen in polling them saying that they're 85% of them would go for Donald Trump. So what we actually know is that her portion of the Republican Party is very, very small. And I am curious that you think that she might not drop out because, I mean, she's right now in her home state of South Carolina. She's not campaigning anywhere. It seems to me that she has a moment right now that she has to choose. Am I going to be someone who's going to go to the bitter end and represent this very small part of the Republican Party, or am I going to be someone who actually is not going to be viewed as obstructionist to what is going to be the Republican nominee, Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's a tough decision. I think she's going to make the decision to stay in. I think she's having, like, I know Nikki Haley a little bit. My wife worked for her years ago. I have no relationship with the campaign now. She seems to be enjoying herself a great deal. And I think she has made peace with the fact that she's not going to be the nominee in 2024. And meanwhile, she's raising a ton of money. She's collecting a lot of names. She's building a national network. I could be wrong, but I just don't think that she anticipates any results tonight that say, okay, now I got to get out.
If she does drop out, will she endorse Trump?
Not tonight.
No.
Like, she might drop out, in the next 24 hours. But I don't think there's any reason why she has to endorse Donald Trump in the next 24 hours.
I mean, I think that for me is the big question. Will she endorse Donald Trump? I mean, it is a really serious question because everything that she said, her entire campaign has been now based around this idea that I am the alternative. And to bend the knee, I think would undercut that.
She won't. But the question also is, what will Donald Trump say about her? I doubt he'll be gracious. Yeah, I doubt he'll be gracious because that's not his way.
It's interesting, Jamie, because Donald Trump and Nikki Haley had a little war of words going on today. Let me play a clip. Right. Listen to this.
There's no path for her to win, no matter what. Now, today, I should win, hopefully, every state.
I don't know why everybody's so adamant that they have to follow Trump's lead to get me out of this race. I'm not ready to get out yet. I'm still sitting there fighting for the people that want a voice.
So I just want to underscore what Jonah said. I don't think she's going to get out, but I spoke to two of her major donors, and they don't know what her plans are. One of them just texted me, hearing anything, ? So they're playing it very close to the vest. Look, one of the issues is, what is the strategy going forward? Apart from whether or not she endorses Donald Trump, does she see some path if the what if factor, if Trump stumbles, is there a place for a Nikki Haley at a brokered convention? I don't think so. Not with Trump delegates. If she is, the path forward is to save the Republican Party, in her mind, down the road, then how does she endorse him?
I don't think she does.
So that's, I don't know if that first Republican debate, she raised her hand when she was asked, will you eventually support the Republican nominee?
Now she
made a commitment at that time.
She's gone soft on that
Now she's walked away from that commitment.
She is.
We'll
she's not Chris Christie, but she's really walked away from that answer. And after all she said about Donald Trump, how could she endorse him?
Yeah. It's a strange situation. All right, guys, everybody stand by. There's a lot more we're going to be discussing. This is CNN's special coverage of Super Tuesday. It continues. Up next, we'll take you live to North Carolina, where the governor's race is also getting ugly. Plus, Trump wrapping up his anti-immigrant remarks.
What they're doing to our country is incredible. They're poisoning our country.
So is that message resonating with voters today? And we're also standing by for the first exit polls. We'll get them to you and give us a clue of what's going on this important day. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to our special coverage of the Super Tuesday primaries. Voters from coast to coast have been heading to the polls throughout the day, including in battleground state North Carolina. The state and its 16 electoral votes is emerging as a key piece of President Biden's reelection strategy. Republicans also investing heavily there and hoping to win the state for the 4th general election in a row now. Diane Gallagher is in Cornelius, North Carolina for us this afternoon. Diane, you've been talking to voters all day there. What are they telling you?
Yeah. Abortion, education, immigration, and democracy. Those are the issues that the voters here in Cornelius, North Carolina, tell me have inspired them to come out and cast their ballots in this primary. And look, we have seen a steady turnout here. You can see we have a little bit of a line that is building at this point. Of course, the primary day turnout is on top of the roughly 695,000 North Carolinians who cast early and absentee ballots. And part of that is North Carolina's outsized importance when it comes to being a swing state come November. But it's also because there is a long down ballot full of competitive races on both the Republican and the Democratic side. And voters here are educated, they're informed, and they're ready to make their voices heard. I spoke with voters who voted for Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Nikki Haley today about why they made the choices that they did.
Trump.
Why?
He's the only man that can help us as a country and bring everything back the way it should be, a normal day-to-day living for all Americans.
Joe Biden, I want to make sure that gun laws in our country, especially with schools, that's taken care of, and just opportunity for resources. I know abortion laws is always changing, so making sure there's opportunities for ladies that do seek abortion, they can get the opportunity to do so, and they have equal rights to take care of their body.
I just do not really agree with Trump's rhetoric and all of his, well, not all of his policies, but I just think that the Republicans deserve a better choice, and I think that's Nikki Haley.
Is Nikki Haley someone you feel like you could vote for in November?
No. I will vote Democrat in November.
Now, that voter you heard from there, that is something that we've seen out here in Cornelius. Voters who are registered unaffiliated, and they plan to vote for Joe Biden in December, but they are choosing the Republican ballot as a protest vote against Donald Trump and picking Nikki Haley instead. Wolf, polls close here at 7:30 p.m. in North Carolina.
We'll be watching it very, very closely. Diane, thank you very much. For more on this critical battleground state, North Carolina, with a contentious governor's race also brewing, I'm joined now by the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party, Anderson Clayton. Anderson, thanks very much for joining us. As you know, fewer than 10% of eligible voters opted for early voting this year, well below even recent midterm primaries. Does that translate from your perspective into a lack of enthusiasm from your base?
No, I think that we see, historically in trends when you have an incumbent president that typically primary elections are a little less competitive. What the North Carolina Democratic Party is tracking this election season, though, is the fact that we had Senate Bill 747 and 749 come through our General Assembly last year from the supermajority that our GOP has in both of our state House and Senate chambers right now that were voter suppression bills, unfortunately. And we also saw voter ID come back into play in North Carolina that's unfortunately really targeted elderly and young voters this election season. And so the North Carolina Democrats took an aim at really understanding where Republicans have put these bills into effect and how they're playing it on the ground in North Carolina across the state.
Interesting. In a year when age, as we all know, is going to be an issue for both presidential candidates, what perspective do you bring as the youngest state party leader in the country? I think you're only 26 years old.
I am indeed. I bring the energy and the aspect of that. There is a Democratic Party that's brewing right now in North Carolina that we're really excited for. You know, the youngest elected officials in North Carolina are all 3 Black men right now. Looking at Jordan Lopez, who's going to be the youngest elected official going into our state house this year. Chris Suggs, who is a local city councilor in Kinston and Lenoir in rural North Carolina right now. And also Tyler Swanson, who's an elected official here in Wake County. We're really excited to see the future of the Democratic Party play out strong at the local level and utilize every level of the ballot this year to get people out. You know, North Carolina Democrats, we are one of a select handful of states that actually elect a council of state. And what we just heard were alluding to the fact that we've got a lot of competitive council of state races this year, including for our state treasurer's race, our superintendent race, our Supreme Court race, and, you know, ensuring that voters know that there are 15 statewide candidates in North Carolina this year that are all going to help Joe Biden be successful in getting back to the White House, because we know that the pathway to the White House runs right through North Carolina.
It's always good to see young people involved in major political moves right now. As you know, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, visited your state of North Carolina, 10 times since taking office. Just last week, you joined her motorcade. How important is North Carolina for President Biden's re-election chances?
Not just did we join her in the motorcade, which was, to be honest with you, the coolest experience of my entire life as a young person, but also as someone that worked for her when she was running for president in 2019 in the Iowa caucuses. But it was exciting because her campaign also did a stop with 75 young organizers from across North Carolina. We did a youth organizer training around a relational organizing tool called REACH that we are going to implement across the state this year, in particular on college campuses, to help young people organize young people, because we know that's what's going to drive out the base this year in North Carolina. It's what won Barack Obama North Carolina in 2008. And it's one of the most important voting blocks that we have. And her being here, you know, the last visit that she made to North Carolina, she went to A&T, one of our historically Black colleges and universities in our state. And we have the most of them in the entire country in North Carolina. And it's so important for this state to see her, because the South deserves to see the first Black woman vice president come here and really embrace the fact that, you know, 55% of Black Americans live in the South right now. And so I'm excited to understand and be able to see this campaign really take the South and wrap it this year and say, we're going to organize and we're going to get into places that the Democratic Party's really been absent from over the last decade, in my opinion.
Anderson Clayton, the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party, thanks so much for joining us. We'll continue this conversation for sure down the road. Appreciate it very much. And CNN special coverage of... Go ahead. What did you say?
I was going to say, honestly, if anyone who would like to get involved too, ncdp.org is where you go. We've got folks on the ground right now, and we're trying to get through this primary season, but the general election is really what we're looking at. So anyone that would like to, all my North Carolinians listening to this right now, thank you for that, Wolf. I appreciate it. Sorry.
All right, good luck. We'll stay in touch. CNN's special coverage of Super Tuesday continues next. President Biden with a special message for Black voters today. Listen.
The way he talks about, the way he acted, the way he dealt with the African-American community, I think has been shameful.
Plus, why is Democrat Adam Schiff running ads that actually help out a potential Republican opponent in the closely watched California Senate race? We'll be right back. Welcome back to our special Super Tuesday primary coverage. Looking at live pictures right now at a polling location in North Carolina where the line wraps around the building. One of the key issues on the ballot this November will, of course, be the border and immigration. Both President Biden and former President Trump put border security at the top of their priority lists. Both visited the southern border just last week on the same day, and it's an issue that's certainly top of mind for voters who live along the Rio Grande. Our Ed Lavandera is joining us now from El Paso, where he's been talking to voters. Ed, what are they telling you?
Hey, Wolf, we're at a polling location in East El Paso, and here in Texas, you have to keep your distance from the polling location, so we're about 100 feet away. But this is the longest we've seen the line throughout the day here at this particular polling location. And the Republican voters that we've spoken with, and this is a state that has been dominated by Republicans for nearly 3 decades now, and no surprise, but you hear immigration and the economy, the top of mind issues. But this primary comes at a fascinating point for the Texas Republican Party, because it is a party party that is essentially engaged in a civil war. And it's the Bush-era Republicans and the new Trump MAGA wing of the party, and those two sides are colliding. And in speaking with voters here today, we spoke with the gentleman named Armando and Sergio, two Republican voters, one voting for Trump, the other Nikki Haley, and it really captures this tension that exists here among Texas Republicans. Why did you vote for Donald Trump?
Because he fulfills commitments. Last time, he said he was going to do something, and he did it, 100%.
You voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020.
We did.
And now you've tired of him, it sounds like. Is that fair to say?
It's not that I'm tired. It's just, a lot of the legal issues and a lot of the stuff that there's a lot of, he stirs up a lot of hate in this country. And I think we don't need that. I think we just need a different direction.
And Sergio went on to tell us that if Donald Trump is the nominee in the general election, he and his wife are considering sitting out of the election. And we should point out that one of the other interesting things to watch here as these votes come through tonight is the issue of immigration and how that is going to affect new voters in the Republican Party. Republicans feel like they are making inroads with traditional Democratic Latino voters along the border. And it'll be interesting to see how they pick up those votes and compare that with the voters in the suburbs of the big cities that have been so alienated by Donald Trump. Kate?
Ed Lavandera in El Paso for us. Ed, it's great to see you. He's going to be there for us all throughout the afternoon and evening. And here with me now, let's talk about this major issue. Adam, we hear from El Paso, Texas, to San Jose, Texas, to Cornelius, North Carolina. All the reporters that we've heard from so far on the ground is immigration is what they're hearing. Border security is what they're hearing from voters. We've heard this throughout the primary, but it's still going nowhere in Washington. It's in the details. It's everyone's angry about it, but how to fix it? Is there any bipartisanship possible on this?
No.
Well, but then how do votes today translate into any progress on it?
Yeah, they don't. Here's the thing, and I want to first off say, I actually worked the border as an Air National Guard pilot, and it's a mess. It's been a mess. And this immigration issue has actually been an issue for a long time, but it's really come to the forefront now. The Democrats had and maybe still have a real opportunity not to win on the issue of immigration, I don't think, but to begin to flip the script. Because as you know, there was a negotiation for the strictest border bill that ever would have come out. And this, by the way, in my time in Congress, there were at least 3 attempts to do bipartisan immigration reform. It was always tanked by the far right every time. Joe Biden and the Democratic campaign machine has got to be hammering this issue over and over. They talk about it, and maybe at the State of the Union, Joe Biden will talk about it. But this has got to be a daily discussion. I fear the Democrats are kind of fighting a little bit of, they don't want to antagonize their left base a little bit in this, so they're staying quiet. But this is what America is going to vote on, and they have an opportunity, again, not to win on the issue, but at least chip away at the Republican advantage.
Ashley, we've seen over and over again through the primary that Donald Trump is, by voters, Donald Trump is trusted more than Joe Biden on the issue of border security and on the issue of immigration by a lot. Do you see what the secret sauce is for Joe Biden and the campaign to chip away like Adam's talking about? It doesn't seem like they've nailed on it yet.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump has the edge on voters in terms of this issue because of his messaging. It's not that he really got anything. He didn't build a wall, even though he talks about building a wall. Again, he tells these lies to voters and just says it over and over, hoping that people will eventually believe it. So I think that's what voters are feeling when they think about the border. But to the congressman's point, I think that Democrats need to go full offense on this. If you want a solution, then you need to put Democrats in charge in the House, the Senate, and the White House for us to solve this problem, because we have the solutions. And it's not just the Republicans, it's Donald Trump who called. You know, the senators were taking a more leadership role and saying, we're going to get this done. But, you know, the next day Mitch McConnell steps down, people want to lead the Senate, and now the bill just dissolves. And so you can't be, and I wouldn't just do it on the House and the Senate and the White House. I would talk about governors and mayors. If you want to be Greg Abbott and send migrants to people in urban communities, then let those urban mayors and those blue state Democrats say, you know what? We do need a solution. our president, Joe Biden, had a solution and you blocked it.
Yeah, one thing Ashley's talking about that is we've seen he has employed very successfully. Donald Trump is the messaging on all. I mean, messaging on all on many issues. This one specifically, I want to play for you, Shermichael, how Donald Trump has spoken today and recently about border security and immigration.
They're poisoning our country.
Our country is being poisoned.
They're poisoning the blood of our country.
And he's also often using the word invasion over and over again. Similar language to what we've heard 4 years ago. Similar language to what we heard 8 years ago. Is this what voters want to hear? If so, why?
I wouldn't use the poisoning the blood if I were advising the former president, but I do think the word invasion has resonance. I mean, Ashley talked about using Democratic mayors and governors to talk about these are the things that Joe Biden would do. I'll use Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, where we are. He's already articulated multiple times that the current administration isn't doing enough to address this issue. It's likely going to cost the city of New York $4.5 billion. You have Black residents, voters who are likely Democratic voters saying we don't want these individuals in our areas because we're already facing daily plight. There aren't enough resources for our everyday struggles. And now we're seeing those resources redirected to new individuals. So I do think that there is resonance there for the average hardworking American who's currently struggling under this economy, who sees, you know what, I don't like the way Joe Biden is handling this. He isn't trustworthy on this issue.
Bring this all together for us, Jamal, because wrapped up in all of this is a key voting bloc that Donald Trump has gained with and Joe Biden has had much more success with, is Hispanic voters.
Yeah, I'm going to tilt a little differently than Shermichael on this. You might be surprised.
I am floored.
You might be surprised about
Please,
that.
Jamal.
But listen, I think there's no reason for Joe Biden to go after the Republican voters that you guys might be talking about, because he's never going to get them. Right?
No
he's never going to go as far as they want.
This is the basis of my
Right.
my initial question. Where is a win on this?
But-
You're not
but-
going to move anybody.
But there are a bunch of independents and a bunch of Democrats who are concerned about immigration, and they want the president to do something about it. But he wouldn't use words like invasion, because on the Democratic side, when we think about it, we think about something that has more to do with compassion and justice. And then how do we have an orderly process that will allow people who want to come to the country to be able to get in and live in peace, right? So that's why you wouldn't use a term like invasion. But you would talk about securing the border, path to citizenship for people who've been here for a long time, those kinds of questions that I think people actually really want the president to have a stance on, and we've seen it. Democracy, the economy, and immigration seem to be very big points on the polls for the Democrats.
And we heard a little bit of what you were just hitting on. It's almost like a little bit of both. We can have two thoughts in your head at one time from some of the voters that Diane Gallagher was talking to in North Carolina. We want to be compassionate. We want to bring them in, but we want to do it legal. We want to protect the border.
That's right.
But how does that translate on Super Tuesday and beyond? Stay with us to find out. Our special coverage of CNN Super Tuesday continues. We're going to take you live to California, where a former baseball great is trying to become the first Republican to win a Senate seat there in more than 35 years. And he's actually getting some help from one of the Democrats also running, Adam Schiff. Plus, Nikki Haley shutting down calls for her to exit the race.
I don't know why everybody's so adamant that they have to follow Trump's lead to get me out of this race.
One of Nikki Haley's top fundraisers is our guest.
Welcome back to our special coverage of the Super Tuesday primaries. A lot of eyes right now on California as we await the results of the very high-stakes Senate race out there. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the front runner, followed by progressive Congresswoman Katie Porter. But hot on her tail is the Republican candidate, Steve Garvey, a former LA Dodgers star. And Congresswoman Barbara Lee comes in a distant fourth. A Republican hasn't won a Senate seat in California in more than 35 years. But with a razor-thin majority, Democrats aren't taking anything for granted right now. Let's get straight to Nick Watt. He's in Santa Ana, California first. Nick, this so-called jungle primary is rather unusual, and it's creating intra-party rivalries right now. Explain, first of all, how it works.
Yeah, Wolf, jungle primary sounds exciting, and it kind of is. I mean, this race is a nail-biter, but not really for who comes in first. All eyes are on who comes in second. As you mentioned, Adam Schiff, veteran member of the House, is ahead in the polls. He was pretty much a quiet member of the House for years, and then he was front and center in Trump's first impeachment, to the point where Trump gave him a nickname. He wore that as a badge of honor, and that really boosted Schiff's profile. Now, the reason that 3 high-profile Dems are fighting for this seat is Senate seats in California don't come up very often. Dianne Feinstein held that seat for about 30 years before she died last September. So they know this is a big prize. And so Katie Porter, she's also been pretty high-profile the past few years, known for the whiteboard in Congress and for really grilling corporate people coming in front of congressional committees. And then, of course, Barbara Lee, who is a progressive veteran from up in the Bay Area. And then Steve Garvey, the wild card here, the Republican candidate, the former Dodger, Padre star. He's a 75-year-old wannabe political rookie. And, you know, we just spoke to one voter outside, an older gentleman with a walking frame, and he said, I'm a baseball fan, I respect Steve Garvey, you can guess who I voted for. Wolf?
And it's interesting, because of this so-called jungle primary format, Adam Schiff is doing something rather surprising. He's boxing out Porter to boost a Republican. Take a look at this. Watch this.
Conservative Republican Steve Garvey voted for Trump twice. Surging in the polls, Fox News says he'd boost Republican control. Democrat Adam Schiff stands up for us.
Turnout on the Democratic side, as you know, Nick, is expected to be low. Could this tactic backfire?
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by backfire. I mean, will Steve Garvey win this race and end up with a seat in the Senate? That is very unlikely. Dem voters outnumber Republicans here by about 2 to 1. You know, the last Republican to win a statewide race in California was Arnold Schwarzenegger back in 2006. Very different time, very unusual candidate. But what Schiff is trying to do here, Schiff wants Garvey to be his opponent for the general election because he knows he has a much better chance of beating Garvey than he has a fellow Dem. I mean, you know, take Katie Porter, for example. If she was running, would she maybe get the kind of more liberal progressive vote? Would Schiff's stance on Israel then become a bit of a problem for him? So that is the issue. The other issue is money. If it's Dem on Dem in November, the Dems are going to waste a lot of money fighting each other, money they could be using to try to fight and win some of those key House seats here in California that they're going to need if they want to get control back of the House. Wolf?
Yeah, this jungle primary, the top 2 candidates who emerge today in this Super Tuesday primary, the top 2 candidates will run in November. We'll see how that all unfolds. Rather unusual situation. Nick, thanks very much. Our special coverage continues. Will Nikki Haley continue her campaign after tonight? We'll talk to one of her top fundraisers. That's next. Plus, we're only minutes away from getting the first exit polling results from today's important vote. They could give us a huge clue on what's going on. Stand by for that.
Nikki Haley is facing some key tests when polls start to close about 2 hours from now. And we're keeping a close eye on early results in Vermont and Virginia. They're among her best chances to win tonight and could be early indicators of whether her presidential bid lives beyond tonight and Super Tuesday. Haley is vowing to stay in the race as long as, the way she puts it, is that she's competitive. As of now, she has no more campaign events scheduled on the campaign calendar. Joining me right now is Eric Levine. He's a top donor and fundraiser for Nikki Haley. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Talk to me about best case scenario for tonight. From your perspective, what's best case scenario realistically for Nikki Haley?
Yeah, I think realistically, Donald Trump's going to win most, if not all, of the states. He's going to get a majority of the votes. But for Nikki Haley, if she continues to get 30 to 40% in each of these states, it really demonstrates there's a wing of the party that continues to reject Donald Trump as its nominee. And the real test for Trump is going to be, can he win them back? And the message to date is it's not a good message. I personally have been barred from MAGA World. I've donated to Nikki Haley.
He promised that, yeah.
He promised that. I can't go on his Ferris wheels.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you know what MAGA World is?
It's some amusement park, but I can't go there, whatever it happens to be. And then he puts out a short list for vice presidents. And who does he include on that? Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard in 2016 was the vice chair of the DNC. She left being a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee to join the Bernie Sanders campaign. I was unaware there was a Bernie Sanders wing of the Republican Party that he wanted to win back. I'm not sure by putting out a short list like that, he's going to be enticing Reagan Republicans like me and the other 30-40% to come back home to vote for him in a general election.
If Nikki Haley doesn't hit that 30-40% in strong fashion tonight, if she does not do well, do you still want to see her to continue to actively campaign beyond today?
That's obviously going to have to be her choice. I'm hopeful that she does continue to do 30-40% because I do believe that there's a significant part of the party that rejects the isolationist wing of the party and really does believe in a strong national
Do you think it's
defense.
more a cause than a campaign at this point?
I think it's evolving into that, and we need an avatar, and right now she's our avatar. If she starts polling 10-15% across the country in Super Tuesday states, she has to get out of the race at that point. I don't think that's going to happen, but then she would have to, because then it'll be Trump versus Biden.
Look, money hasn't been her problem. I mean, you've been fundraising for her. The campaign raised $28 million in January and February, outraising Trump in January. Why do you think she continues, despite how she's not winning in primaries, how she continues to appeal to donors?
To your point, I think she's become a cause, and she's become our spokesperson. Look,
so where do the 20, 30, 40% go if she leaves the race?
That's a great question. I really don't know. Because my wing of the party wants to support Ukraine. I want to support Israel, and I want to support Taiwan, and I want to secure the border. And I don't think it's necessary that we have to do all four simultaneously. Let's get the wins where we can.
Talk to me about the struggle. I'm not going to ask you the question we were talking about in the break because you think it's a useless question to ask who you would vote for when Nikki Haley's out, if you'd vote for Donald Trump. What is the struggle, though, for you if Nikki Haley is not running, what you do? Do you not vote? Is that an option for you?
Here's the struggle. Joe Biden is a cognitively impaired octogenarian whose policies I disagree with in the extreme. I think his distance he's putting between the United States and Israel now is disgraceful. I think the way he's handled Ukraine, he's just simply not doing enough. He's always a day late and a dollar short, and he hasn't been forceful enough in dealing with China. The border, of course, is a crisis. Even he now admits that. So I can't vote Democratic. And the anti-Semitism on the radical left, on these college campuses and across the country, have convinced me as an American Jew I cannot vote Democratic. So can I vote Republican? Can I vote for Donald Trump? It's tough because Donald Trump has implied he's going to get out of NATO.
Well, he says he doesn't want your support as
Then how does he win?
Well, this is the struggle, and this is what we are presented with on a very important day with so many states voting and a huge night for Nikki Haley as one of her big donors. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. All right, next, the first exit polling numbers, they are coming in as we're learning when the Trump campaign believes that they will have secured enough delegates to make Trump the presumptive Republican nominee. CNN special coverage continues.
Breaking news, new exit polling just coming into CNN as millions of voters head to the polls in 16 contests across the country. Welcome back to CNN's special coverage of Super Tuesday. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
I'm Kate Baldwin in New York. And Wolf, our political team is going through the exit polling numbers as we speak. And in a moment, we will know who's voting today and why, and what it could tell us not only about tonight's outcomes, but also in the November general election. Donald Trump is hoping tonight will put him one very big step closer to pulling off something that hasn't happened in over 100 years, and that is to win non-consecutive terms. Trivia of the night, the last person to do that, Grover Cleveland, back in 1892.
Grover Cleveland, like me, a fellow Buffalonian. That's right, Kate. Very proud of Grover Cleveland, and Millard Fillmore, for that matter, another Buffalonian. For Republicans, there are 865 delegates up for grabs, and a strong showing tonight for Trump will put the nomination within striking distance. We have a team of our reporters fanned out across the nation as Americans head to the polls. I want to start with our Kristen Holmes. She's been working her sources with the Trump campaign all day. She's over at Mar-a-Lago tonight in Florida. Kristen, you have some new reporting, I understand, at this hour. What can you tell us?
That's right, Wolf. So I've been talking to senior advisors to the Trump campaign who say that they are obviously aware that Donald Trump is not going to hit that threshold to become the presumptive nominee tonight. But their big hope, and it's actually twofold, is one, that he will get enough delegates to essentially cinch the nomination next week, or at least as early as next week, and also that his win is definitive enough that Nikki Haley drops out of the race. They are very aware of the fact that Haley hasn't said what she's going to do past Super Tuesday. But to be very clear, they are not counting on her dropping out. They have already pivoted to a general election. Their focus is on President Joe Biden. They just want this win to be definitive enough so that Donald Trump and his team can begin uniting the party around the former president as they head into November.
Oh. Kristen, thank you so much. Let's go now to John Berman in Castle Rock, Colorado. John, Colorado was the center of the effort to keep Trump off the ballot, an effort that was swatted down by the Supreme Court. You've been talking to voters all day since we were on TV together earlier. What are you hearing now?
So Colorado has been in the news lately, Kate, hasn't it? The Supreme Court decided yesterday that states could not ban Donald Trump for being on ballots, for being an insurrectionist. And I can show you right here on this sample ballot, Donald Trump's name is on it. It has been on it because the previous lower court decision was stayed until the Supreme Court weighed in. But now that the court has weighed in, it's just staying on the ballot. And people have had this chance to vote for Donald Trump for weeks and weeks now, as most people in Colorado vote by drop box. But in terms of the impact of that court decision, I did have the chance to talk to some voters, including Donald Trump voters, about what not just this court case, but all the court cases, how they have impacted their feelings about Trump. Listen. To any of the issues surrounding January 6th, the court cases, how much do they weigh into your vote?
A lot, because they're trying to take away freedom from being able to vote, being able to elect, and making it a federal issue, a Supreme Court issue, to take that away from us, and that's not okay.
So these cases make you more likely to vote for Trump, not less likely?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so not an obstacle, an incentive to vote for Donald Trump. That is among Trump voters. We have seen a number of Democrats here, I want to say, who are here to vote for President Biden in the Democratic primary. And when you ask them what's motivating them, their answer, Donald Trump. So you can see the motivating factor in this election is this historic candidacy of Donald Trump, who is trying to be, as you both have noted, the first non-consecutive president in U.S. history. And Wolf, as I toss it back to you, I think I was in embed covering the Grover Cleveland campaign in the 1890s.
Yeah, what about Millard Fillmore?
I did not. I missed the Millard Fillmore campaign, but I did study it in college.
All right, I studied it too. All right, thanks, John Berman, very, very much. We have breaking news. We're getting our first look right now at exit polling data that has just been released. These numbers will give us the first clues about who some of these primary voters are and how they feel about a key issue that could define the general election. David Chalian, our political director, has been carefully going over these new numbers. He's joining us now. David, give us the latest on what you're learning.
Yeah, well, if we're going to look here at two states on the East Coast, Virginia and North Carolina, they close earlier in the evening, two of the 16 states holding contests today, and a sense of the electorate showing up in these Republican presidential primaries. We asked, do you consider yourself part of the MAGA movement? In Virginia, only 31% of Republican primary voters in these early numbers, and these will change throughout the night as more surveys come in, say that yes, 31% say yes, they're part of the MAGA movement, but 6 in 10, 59% of Republican primary voters in Virginia say no, they're not part of the MAGA movement. That's the least MAGA electorate we've seen in primaries to date. It looks more similar to what we saw in New Hampshire. In North Carolina, it's a little more MAGA-fied, if you will. 39% say yes, they consider themselves to be a part of the MAGA movement. 54% say they are not. Back to Virginia, we asked, if Donald Trump is convicted of a crime, is he still fit for the presidency? 53%, a majority of Republican primary voters, say yes. Donald Trump is still fit for the presidency, even if he is convicted of a crime. 40% say no. In North Carolina, even more so. 64% of Republican primary voters in the Tar Heel state are saying, yes, Trump is fit for the presidency, even if a convicted criminal. Only 32% will say he is not. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party.
Very interesting numbers indeed. All right, thanks very much, David, for that update. And we're going to be getting a lot more exit polling information coming in, so stand by for that. But Jamie, let me get your reaction. I think it's pretty significant. Only 39% of Republican voters in Virginia said yes, they believe that they are part of the MAGA movement. 59% say no. In North Carolina, a little different. 39% say yes, part of the MAGA movement. 54% say no.
Right. So, look, that doesn't mean they won't vote for Donald Trump at the end of the day. They just don't identify as part of the MAGA movement. To me, Wolf, the other numbers that were more striking was the question that followed, is he fit to be president?
If convicted.
If convicted. In Virginia, 53%, more than half, say he's fit to be president. In North Carolina, 64%, even more. Look, one of the questions we're trying to find out here is with people who are not MAGA, who might want an alternative to Trump, can Joe Biden peel these people away in November? When you see numbers like that, and let's just say, as David Chelling just said, these are the first exit polls coming in. They're not, these are the early polls. They're not the final polls. But when you see more than half saying that he's fit to be president if he is convicted, that does not sound very optimistic for Joe Biden being able to peel away these voters.
Well, I disagree with that.
I disagree. I disagree as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, the people who are voting today, let's just say they're all going to vote for Trump if Trump's the nominee. Those are not the people that Joe Biden needs to win over. The people Joe Biden needs to win over are mostly what they call dual haters, people who don't like Biden or Trump. First of all, I'm very skeptical about these numbers. It sounds to me like Northern Virginia is doing a lot more exit polling than Central and Southern Virginia. But if you need, as the rule of thumb is that you need 90% of your own party to win in a two-person race, if 4 in 10, 3 in 10 of your own most committed voters in a primary are saying, yeah, that rules them out, what does that say about moderates, squishy, middle-of-the-road swing voters? Those numbers can be much higher for those people.
Well, can I just say one thing quickly, which is we just saw Kate Baldwin interview a Nikki Haley donor who said in the end he would consider voting for Trump over Biden. So I just don't know that these things are so black and white with that
well, I think they're not
to...
black and white, but I do think it spells trouble. I mean, when you see 4 in 10 voters saying in a very Republican state like, North Carolina, that it would be disqualifying. I mean, the big question is, will that even come to pass because of all the legal delays that we've seen?
Right. We don't know.
We don't know. So this might all just be speculative. But there is clearly a real problem that I see for Donald Trump. On the other hand, with Joe Biden, the thing that I've been looking for are what are black voters doing? What are Latino voters doing? We saw eye-popping numbers in these recent polls over the weekend showing a real shift. And so if Joe Biden can't get his coalition together, then you're going to really see, where are all these people going to go, and are these people going to cross-pollinate?
I think these numbers that show that more than half of these voters would believe he would be fit to be president if convicted shows you something we all already know, which is that this is Donald Trump's Republican Party. Period. These are loyalists. Who, and we heard it on our air just recently, a voter saying that the more the justice system takes him on, the more she supports him because she believes it's unfair and the Justice Department has been weaponized, and that message has gotten through. And it seems to me that these are just committed voters. And the one thing Joe Biden does not have, I mean, if you ask that question of Biden voters, I don't know what the response would be. It's purely hypothetical, of course, but these people are there for him no matter what.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and I think it's one of the more frustrating things is that Trump is running as an outsider when he's clearly the establishment. They've rigged all of these primaries to be basically winner take all for his benefit. If a Romney or a Bush had done that in the past, the populace would have been freaking out.
Right.
So I agree with all that. At the same time, if you just changed the wording on these polls and made it about Biden, we just had, all this talk about the non-committed or uncommitted voters in Michigan.
Right.
Those numbers were much smaller than the voters for Nikki Haley. There is a lot of dissension in the ranks of the Republican Party, and when all you need is 5 or 10% of the swing vote to go the other way, the 40% of the party that is not all in for Trump is a big red flag, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's clear. And Jamie, let me get your reaction because these are Republican primary voters. Right. In Virginia, 40% of those Republican voters said they would not vote for Trump if he were convicted. In North Carolina, 32% of Republican voters who voted today said they would not be able to vote for Trump if convicted. That's a huge chunk. If this is a close election between Trump and Biden in November, that's a huge chunk of potential voters for the Republican.
It is. I will tell you, I always come back to one thing, battleground states. And the real question is, what's going to happen in those states? Will there be passion and enthusiasm and get out the vote for Joe Biden? So, yes, these are very interesting, but you have to look at those battleground states and look at the problems that Joe Biden is having. And then with a very small number of voters in some of these states, it can go either way.
Well, the voters who won't vote for him if convicted, the question is, are they going to vote for Joe Biden?
Right.
That's, I don't necessarily see that happening because, they're not Democrats, they're Republicans, and they don't like Joe Biden. And so the question for the Biden campaign is, what do you do about all of these trials? And as you were saying, who knows what's going to come to fruition, right? When? But how does the Biden campaign attack this? Because, they're not going to get the Republicans, but how would they maybe get some of those squishier Republicans who don't want a president in the White House who's been convicted of a felony?
But
Lulu, we do know that Trump is facing, 91 criminal charges, potentially. We don't know if he's going to be convicted of any of them between now and November.
Right. We don't know. And that is the big question here, because I don't know often how much you have to see of Donald Trump, how many different issues he has to have, how much he has to struggle with the law, he has to struggle with all these indictments for people to, disavow him. I think what we've seen is basically there is nothing that he could do that is going to really push away that core of support. And that core of support is very enthusiastic. They say in poll after poll, they like him, they want him back. And so the question here is, you do not see this on the Democratic side at this point. You do not see that enthusiasm. You see a kind of, heavy sigh and okay, he's our guy and we're going to back him. And the other part is, you're really not seeing the Biden push that democracy on the line is going to be a get out the vote thing.
All right, everybody stand by. We have a lot more to assess. We're getting more poll numbers, exit poll numbers as well. Our special coverage of Super Tuesday will continue in just a moment. We're getting, once again, more exit poll results. They are coming in. Our John King is standing by. He'll be over at the Magic Wall to break down when Trump may actually be able to clinch the Republican presidential nomination. Plus, President Biden watching a number of key factors tonight. New York's governor, a Biden ally, is my guest.
Welcome back to CNN's special coverage of Super Tuesday. And we have breaking news. More exit polling is coming in, and voters at this hour heading to the polls in battleground state Virginia. Virginia is one of the 16 states holding Super Tuesday contests, and there is no other date on the calendar that has more primary delegates at stake than Super Tuesday, hence the name. The number of delegates up for grabs in Virginia tonight, 48 for Republicans, 99 for Democrats. Let's go now to Jessica Dean, who's in Richmond, Virginia. Polls there are closing in a little over an hour. Jessica, you've been talking to voters in Virginia throughout the day, including an immigrant who says immigration is among his top issues. Tell us more.
Yeah, Kate, I asked him when you were going in there voting, what was top of mind for you? He immediately said immigration and the economy. And so I asked him who he would be voting for. I'll let you listen to our exchange. Who did you vote for and why?
Donald Trump.
And why?
He's the best president. And I came here when I was 26 years old, 40 years ago. Okay, I've been watching this country. This country is the best country in the world. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I've been very blessed to be living in this country. But I hope the Democrat would not be able to destroy this country.
So he said he was born in Hong Kong, came here decades ago, Kate, and will be voted for Donald Trump and will be voting for him in the general election if he is the Republican nominee. I also talked to a voter who is a Democrat. He has been a Democrat for years, but he wanted to use his vote today as a protest vote, but not against Biden. Here's what he told me. And so who did you vote for?
Well, I voted for Nikki Haley, but I'm a Democrat because I wanted to vote against Trump in some way or another. So that's the only way I could do it.
So again, a little over, an hour and a half, as you mentioned, Kate, as the polls remain open here. We have seen kind of a steady trickle of people. It has constantly been busy, but no lines. But what has been truly interesting is person to person, what their reasoning is behind their votes. There's just a lot going on in American voters' minds right now, Wolf, and it has been very telling that each person kind of has their own reasoning about what they're doing today.
Yeah, good point, Jessica. Thank you very much, Jessica Dean. In Richmond, Virginia, I want to go to John King. He's with me over here at the Magic Wall right now. Let's focus in on Virginia right now. Looking ahead to the general election, how competitive do you anticipate Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, could be?
It's a great question. Republicans hope it is competitive again. It has not been in a long time. Why do they hope that? Let's just zoom it out. Number one, to watch tonight. It was interesting listening to those voters. As we watch Virginia tonight, one of the places we're going to watch is the northern Virginia suburbs. I'll circle that there. One reason is you see this little yellow dot here. Nikki Haley's only win has been here in the District of Columbia. That's not a lot of votes, so let's not make too much of that. Nikki Haley's only win, though, in the Republican primary so far is here. Can she carry that support of more moderate Republicans over into the northern Virginia suburbs, Wolf? That'll be one of the questions tonight. Or can Donald Trump perform better than the suburbs that he has in recent years? Because you see the green up there. I'll give you some yellow down here. You just look. Let's just go back and look at the 2016 Republican primary. If you go back to 2016 when Donald Trump was the newcomer, see that light red up here in the suburbs? That's Marco Rubio. You see the dark red down here? That's Donald Trump. Donald Trump's trademark is running it up in small, rural, working-class communities. The question is, can he improve his standings in the suburbs? Because it hurt him in the primary there. And you have to go back, Wolf, you have to go back a very long time. It has been 20 years since a Republican for president carried the Commonwealth of Virginia. When I started doing this, it was a red state. Then it was a purple state. Since 2008, when Obama won, it has been a blue state. So the challenge is, can Republicans pull it back? Are Joe Biden's problems significant enough that Virginia comes into play when we get to November 2024? That will be a question. At the moment, it's a blue state in presidential politics. But tonight, we'll learn a little bit.
You know, it's interesting. As you know, more than a third of all the Republican delegates are up for grabs just tonight. Trump is expected to win a huge chunk of that. When do you anticipate potentially he could be the Republican presidential nominee?
Right. So look at what he has done so far. This is the map of all the contests so far, primaries and caucuses. And you see, with the exception of that tiny yellow in the District of Columbia, you can barely see it. It's all Donald Trump in the states so far. So he has 276 delegates so far, right? You need 1,200 plus to win. That's a big number. Here's a better way to look at it. He has won 83% of the delegates so far. So Donald Trump is on a march to the Republican nomination. So you ask the question, when? So let's switch over to the delegate tracker and see where we are right now as this pops up. Here is where we enter the night, right? These are all the contests that have happened so far, 276 to 43. If tonight goes roughly along the percentages the contests have gone so far, and the Trump folks are very optimistic about this, this shows Trump winning the board, right? That shows Trump winning Vermont tonight, winning Virginia tonight, winning all the way across the country. Let's see if Nikki Haley can pull off a surprise in Vermont or in Virginia or maybe somewhere else. But if not, the Trump campaign, Wolf, by the time we go to bed very late tonight or in California, early tomorrow morning, East Coast time right here, could get to about 1,115. You need 100 more than that, 1,215 to clinch the nomination. So it is conceivable Donald Trump gets oh so close tonight. Symbolically, over, if you have a gap like that. And then next Tuesday night on March 12th, Donald Trump should pass. So very early in the month of March, you heard Kristen Holmes earlier talking about they're moving on to the general election. They see this as a Biden-Trump rematch. The country may not love that idea, but the Trump people, when they look at the math, they're right. Start thinking about November, because tonight, they'll get close. Next Tuesday, they're likely to clinch.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting indeed. It's going to be a long night. We'll watch it very, very closely. Our special Super Tuesday coverage will continue next. We're getting new exit poll results, including when voters in 2 battleground states finally decided on a candidate. Plus, we're going to take you to North Carolina, where polls are closing in just about 2 hours. All eyes on a Trump candidate who the former president calls Martin Luther King on steroids. President Biden finds himself in a starkly different reality right now than his last Super Tuesday. 4 years ago, Joe Biden pulled off the biggest, fastest, and most unexpected comeback in political history. His team's spending this Super Tuesday examining exit polls for potential problems that lie ahead. I'm joined now by the governor of New York, Democrat Kathy Hochul. Governor, thanks so much for joining us. As we see these new exit polls coming in, how does the president pull Republican voters over to his side when a majority in these exit polls, Republicans, say Donald Trump is fit for the presidency, even if he's convicted of a crime?
Well, Wolf, it's great to be on your show again. And here's my advice for the Biden team. The Republicans you want to pull over are the women, especially since Donald Trump has made no disguise about his desire to continue stripping away the rights of all American women, not just Democrats, but Republican women and their daughters and granddaughters. So he promised he would stack the Supreme Court with people who are hostile to women's rights. He was successful in overturning a Roe v. Wade, which is one of his goals. And now the Republican Party is going after the right of a family to get started with IVF. I mean, this is beyond the pale, that and contraception. So I think there's an opening for them to go after Republican women to help get him over the finish line in November. So when that comes down as the choice, someone who supports women, always has, always will, and someone who intentionally denigrates them, abuses them, as well as stripping away their rights, it'll be crystal clear who people need to vote for in this country in 8 months from now.
One thing we're looking for, Governor, as these exit polls continue to come in, is how many voters actually decided who they were voting for months ago. How tough is it going to be for the president to change the minds of voters as this campaign moves ahead?
Well, the campaign for the Biden team has not even started. Right now, they've been focused on getting through these early primaries. You have to do that first. The television ads and the contrast to show the policies of Donald Trump, because we don't have to guess what he would do as president. We have a 4-year record that tells us what happened to our standing in the international arena, how people are afraid around the world of a Donald Trump presidency, what's going to do to our trade balance, and also raising prices for everyone in this country when he starts going to war with everyone, as well as him taking away the rights of Americans. So the campaign has not really started in earnest. So I say it is still 8 months to go. It is an eternity in politics. As someone who's run about 15 elections myself, that is a long way off. And when people start to hear more about Joe Biden's record, not just how bad Donald Trump is, but the record of accomplishment right here in New York, massive, massive infrastructure projects that have been stopped by Donald Trump, the Essential Gateway Tunnel, which is finally happening, creating tens of thousands of good union jobs, bringing Micron, the largest manufacturer of semiconductors in America, $100 billion of investment in my home state of New York, your home state. When the story gets out of the record of accomplishment, people are going to say, why do we even entertain going with Donald Trump? We know we have to stick with. Let's stick with the competent leadership, the trusted leadership, and that'll get us through the next 4 years.
I know you've said, Governor, that you welcome the president's taking more executive action on immigration. Given the daily strain on New York resources right now, are you concerned that we still haven't seen specific hardcore movement from the White House on this very, very sensitive issue?
Wolf, this is a huge issue for us here in the state of New York, and there is a simple answer to all of this. If the Republican Congress cajoled and pushed by 10 Republican members of Congress just from the state of New York. If they used their clout with the Speaker and said, let's just pass the bipartisan bill that was supported by the majority of senators, Democrats and Republicans. If we can get that done, that'll do exactly what Joe Biden said he wants done. He wants more money for the borders. He wants to shut down the border, at least give us a pause for now until we can get this under control. And the state of New York would benefit as well with financial assistance as well as other states. They have a plan, they have a strategy, and the Republicans said they would not do it. They refused. You know why? Because Donald Trump told them not to. They are so under his control, it's pathetic. So executive actions, they're being developed right now. I've been in communication with them. They will happen, but it shouldn't have to come to this, Wolf. There is a path. There was an opportunity. They could have solved this. Even the president went down to the border and reached his hand out to Donald Trump and said, let's solve this together. And Donald Trump said, no. You know what? You break it, you own it. Republicans now own the border problem, and we're going to make sure everybody, at least in the state of New York, knows that this is going to be a liability for the Republicans running for office in November. This is the path for Hakeem Jeffries to become the Speaker.
Let me quickly follow up, Governor. It was, almost 2 weeks ago when the president told you and other governors who were visiting in Washington he's considering taking executive action because of Congress's inaction right now. With 600 migrants a day arriving in New York City, how much longer can your state wait?
Well, we want to get this done as soon as possible. But as everyone knows, there are going to be people who bring litigation the second he does this. He tried action last May, for example. And for a while, we had some cessation of people coming across the border. At least it slowed down a lot. We felt the difference. What happened next? People went to court, they sued, and the judge shut down the program, and all the chaos started again. That's what the Biden administration is trying to be thoughtful about, to come up with a path that'll make sure that it's sustainable into the courts. So that's the pause right now, the delay. But I know they're anxious to get this under control just as much as we are, and we know that'll happen in the short order.
Governor Hochul, thanks so much for joining us. Always good to speak with someone like me from Western New York. Appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you, Wolf. Good to see you again.
Thank you. There's more breaking news we're following. We're getting more exit polls coming in, and they reveal who voted. And when it comes to liberals, conservatives, and moderates, the results are coming in next. Plus, we will take you to the crucial battleground state of North Carolina. Trump narrowly won it in 2020. Can Biden win it this time around? Welcome back to our special coverage of the Super Tuesday primaries. There's breaking news right now. We have more results from the newly released exit polls just released. The latest numbers offer a more detailed picture of exactly who the voters are in these key states and when they made up their minds about who to support in the primary. David Chalian, our political director, has new numbers to share with us, and he's back. David, what more are you seeing?
Well, we're looking at the difference in the ideological makeup of these Republican primary voters in Virginia versus North Carolina, and I'll show you why Nikki Haley's campaign may see a bit more opportunity perhaps in Virginia than they do in North Carolina. Look here, 28% consider themselves very conservative, 37% somewhat conservative, but look, combine the moderate and the liberal, 35%, a touch more than a third of Republican primary voters in Virginia are either moderate or liberal. That would seem to be a place Nikki Haley should go and target. If you compare it to North Carolina, it's just a more conservative primary electorate in North Carolina. Nearly 80%, if you add up very conservative and somewhat conservative, nearly 8 in 10 Republican primary voters in North Carolina are conservative. Only just under a quarter, 23%, are either moderate or liberal. So probably stronger Trump territory there. Decision made when? This is fascinating. In Virginia, 65% of Virginia Republican primary voters decided before earlier this year. So before the Iowa caucuses, before the New Hampshire primary, before anybody voted, decisions were already made by 2/3 of Republican primary voters. That's locked in. And then a similar story in North Carolina. You see also that a majority here, not as big of a majority, 51%, if you look at the bottom there, decided who they were going to support in this primary before this year. So if indeed Donald Trump steamrolls his way through, the fact that so many voters sort of locked into their choice so early on shows that what's been happening in this contest hasn't necessarily been altering the shape of this contest. Kate?
Let's dig into this. David Chalian, thank you so much. These exit polls are always so interesting because we're hearing directly from voters as they're heading in or exiting, hence the name. Jamal, what's your takeaway from what David just laid out here?
You know, on that score that David just laid out, I'm taking a look at what he said about the moderate and liberal numbers in Virginia. 35% of that population is moderate or liberal. That's not something that you're used to seeing in some of these more conservative Republican states. So it'll be interesting to see if Nikki Haley actually overperforms some of her recent numbers because there are more people who maybe are a little less inclined to beef Donald Trump. But the earlier number that still sticks in my head is that 40% of people in Virginia said that he was not fit if he gets convicted. To me, that says to you that those people, even if, let's say, half of them, 20% of that, still vote for Donald Trump, there's still a big number of voters out there that are available to Joe Biden, or they're not going to vote, or they go third party. But that, to me, seems like a problem. If 40% of Republican voters say he is not fit for office, that's a big number to me.
I would disagree on the idea that some of the moderates would potentially vote for the president, because I would be curious if you begin to unpack those moderates. Are they somewhat conservative on the economy? Maybe they are socially liberal. Are they somewhat conservative on foreign policy issues? I would want to break those numbers down
Is a Virginia conservative and North Carolina conservative?
Well, right. I would want to break those numbers down
but
further.
Virginia's a good state for Democrats, right?
It is, but I think this is also a part of the former president's strategy of trying to delay all of these trials. They recognize and understand that if there is a guilty verdict, it is going to wreak havoc on his possibilities of returning to the White House. With that said, though, if you can delay, most Republican voters, I think, are principally concerned with some other issues that are far more tangible to their everyday lives, and they will hold their nose and vote for Donald Trump because they believe he's more beneficial to them on some of those aspects in terms of President Biden.
And that's where ideology really can tell you a lot about where they would vote on some of these issues, immigration, economy. What do you see here, Ashley?
Well, the challenging thing about this primary season is that we're learning a lot about the Republican electorate, but so little about the Democratic electorate. Last week, we were just sitting here with Michigan and we had the uncommitted voters, right? And so that was a real snapshot. Also on the Democratic side in South Carolina, we had really high black turnout when there was a question mark. So those are two data points. But if I'm the Biden campaign, I am really clear that the folks who think he will be fit for office, whether or not he is convicted of a crime, they're never coming to any Democratic candidate, most likely. So I'm looking at the individuals who Jamal identifies as moderate or very moderate and seeing who are they, to Governor Hochul's point. What is that demographic of women in there? Are they women that will are concerned about abortion, which we heard in the earlier piece, in the earlier hour in Virginia, and really trying to figure out what is the message? It's not one issue because voters are dynamic, but what are the issues that I can weave a story together that is a stronger and more compelling argument than just don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. Actually, develop a message, and he can do this in the State of the Union. This is what I am doing, this is what I have done, and this is why you can side with me for these moderate voters in these two states.
Can I just add on to what Ashley just said? I'll let you go, Adam. It's not just what he has done and is doing now, but what he wants to do in the future. That's what I'm looking for in the State of the Union.
I think
this isn't about State of the Union, but that to me is the question.
One of the things that like stands out to me, if you see the moderate liberal number, whenever I did my own polling, there were always people that self-described moderate Republicans, even some liberal Republicans, which I always never really understood. But when you look at that number, that's, as we're talking about what Biden can target, here's a good way to target that: Ukraine. Right? Maybe not everybody agrees on some of the border stuff. I don't know. Maybe a moderate Republican is not as much of a border hawk. I guarantee you every one of those moderate and liberal Republicans and every one of those support Ukraine. That is Joe Biden's opportunity to chip away and say, look, you may not like all my policies, but do you really think a Russian victory over Ukraine is going to be beneficial to the United States of America? And I think that could
Adam, do you think after Super Tuesday it frees up Republicans to be more supportive of Ukraine funding?
So that's exactly what I think is possible. Right now in Texas, you have a lot of House races that are up. Mike McCall, for instance, who's the chair of Foreign Affairs, okay? He's worried about his primary. He'll get past it. Once they all get past these primaries, they don't have now a primary for 2 more years. It's sad and it's cynical that I have to say this, but I'm a politician. I understand it. Now that they're past their primaries, they can now say, okay, we compel action to the floor. 3 of them could do it.
But I think there's a good point about.
So, Marco,
No,
I
no,
just
go
want to
ahead.
build on this point about the democracy or Ukraine. The Biden campaign in the midterms and in this is very clear that they want to lean on this is to save our democracy. If you connect the dots between what is happening in Ukraine and finding funding and protecting our democracy, it does give you a lane to bring some of those moderate voters over. Because, again, we also have seen polling that most people are not thinking just solely about American democracy. But if you can attach it to that international dynamic,
But do you run the risk of losing some of those moderates as the president attempts to placate to the progressive base in the Democratic Party as it pertains to Israel? I absolutely think you do. I am not convinced that if the president attempts to turn out younger voters of color, you're not going to be able to bring those moderates. And I would caution my Democratic friends here, focus on turning out your own base, your own party, not trying to pull in Republicans. That's not how Joe Biden's going to win the White House.
Republicans
we did that. In 2020, we built a coalition actually where we had Cindy McCain support Joe Biden. We had the largest amount of historical turnout because we had our base and we had moderates and independents. I'm never going to say sell out your base.
Penetrating, though,
Jamal,
Ashley,
I have
at
a
all.
final thought. This, to me, and that everyone's basically decided way before Iowa in these states, tells me that there's a lot of work ahead. Does that include the State of the Union for Joe Biden right now?
It does include the State of the Union in the sense that people really want to know what's next out of this president. And look, one of the questions about his age is people sort of look at Joe Biden and they think like, gosh, maybe the guy's like a little too old for the job. But if he's talking about the future of America and what he wants to do for the future of America and the Mars lander or whatever it is he wants to talk about, that's something people might rally around.
The nearest of futures is our special coverage of Super Tuesday continues. Coming up next, we're going to go live to North Carolina, where Donald Trump is going all out in order to get his candidate for governor, a man he calls, quote, Martin Luther King on steroids, across the finish line.
All right, there's some breaking news we're watching right now. The Iowa Democratic Party has just released the results of the Democratic presidential caucuses in Iowa. As expected, President Biden is clearly the winner of the Iowa caucuses. Let's take a closer look at the votes that have just been released. President Biden got a little bit more than 11,000 votes. 480 votes went for, quote, uncommitted. Kate, back to you.
All right, Wolf, bouncing off that breaking news, let's talk now about the task ahead for Joe Biden. Let's pick up where we were. State of the Union, he has a big opportunity ahead. But still, I'm looking at these exit polls still, Ashley, and where are people movable? Where are people gettable? There is no gettable voter anymore, Kate Baldwin declares.
No, I think a lot of America is kind of where they're going to be from now until November. But I do think that there are individuals who are persuadable to decide whether or not they're actually going to vote. That's a type of persuasion. I also feel like right now there's it might not be new, but it feels new to me. There is this fact versus feeling. The facts say the economy is doing great, that Joe Biden is doing things to bring inflation down, to increase jobs. But people aren't feeling that now. And so the task for the Biden campaign and Joe Biden in the State of the Union is to bring that chasm of fact versus feeling together and make people believe in the facts that they're seeing in hope that they will feel it maybe by November, but definitely in another 4 years.
Michael, one thing I heard Ron Brownstein has said over and over again, and it really sticks with me, is that Nikki Haley throughout the Republican primary has left breadcrumbs for Joe Biden all in her trail, where Joe Biden could pick up some more voters, some support, white-collar suburban voters, moderates. Do you agree?
I would agree with that, but I think to the point that Ashley was just making, I think there is some serious discontent with Joe Biden and his ability to penetrate that discontent. I haven't seen it yet. I mean, yeah, the numbers appear to be good on the economy. Sure, people are employed, but I have a job, but I'm not making enough. The cost of everyday goods have increased. The prices of gas, it ebbs and flows. And so those are very real things that people may say, I'm not excited, I'm not enthusiastic, I may sit home or I may vote third party. And I think the president has to figure out a way to recover.
How do you break through on the fact versus feeling?
Well, you know, one thing you do is you have a moment like the president had a year ago when the Republicans tried to come after him on Social Security, and he made fun and had this moment where he tested back and forth. So if I'm the Republicans, I'm saying don't do anything. Just sit quietly, let him have a good, boring speech, and then let it go by. Because if Joe Biden is able to show from that stage that he is competent and able to kind of joust with people who are in the audience, he'll do a lot to allay some of the fears people have that he's not up to the job.
By the way, as a congressman, they would always brief us before the State of the Union. Guys, don't look at your phone. Don't do anything, because when you're doing something stupid is when the camera's going to focus in on you. So you were talking about that. I'm like, oh yeah, it kind of brought back memories of like you're sitting there for 2 hours because you know if you do something stupid like pick your nose, it's going to be on TV.
Paul Begala said something, Ashley. He told me yesterday that Joe Biden, he can't pivot on one major issue that voters are concerned about, and that is he can't pivot back to being 45 years old again. So with that, what is the answer, in your view, going forward still?
Well, I think that you can lean in on abortion. I do think you do talk about go on attack with immigration, which we talked about, and how Republicans don't want to govern and talk about the future of America.
It's great
and tell jokes.
Yeah.
Jokes abound, people. But no joking. It's very serious. It is Super Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us. The first polls are closing in 1 hour. Our special coverage of Super Tuesday continues now.